And yeah, so let's get started. Wilson, you can take it away.
Hello, good afternoon. As Monica said, I am Associate Professor of Physics and Science Education at Morehead State University. One of my areas of interest has always been multiculturalism and diversity, particularly in school settings, in educational settings. I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully you did your homework. I told Giovanna to send you guys a link or a video. It's a really boring documentary that I wanted you guys to look at. It was like 7 hours long, but I'm sure you did, because we're going to start discussing some of the ideas in that homework in just a second. Let me go ahead and check how I can let's get the screen there and start there. All right, so our topic for today, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, these are some of the main objectives for the presentation. Number one, I want you guys to get the big concept, the big ideas in diversity, inclusion. I want to be talking about multiculturalism and how that can be applied in educational settings. I'll do some of the talking. You guys will do most of the talking. We're going to have several opportunities for you guys to share your experiences regarding topics in this area. We're going to see some examples of biased language that I have seen on television, the internet, and the media. And I want you guys to share some of your experience, how sometimes by accident, people kind of blur out things online or on television that, may be offensive to some groups. Third, we're going to be talking about how some people react when you start seeing multiculturalism in the media and in general. There has been a transition, like a decades-long transition to our multicultural ideas, and not everybody agrees with those. And we still see in the social media a little bit of a backlash when some of these show up. We're going to define multicultural education. And we're going to be talking about a number of strategies that will help you develop a positive learning environment in your classroom in the context of diversity and inclusion. And finally, we're going to share, right, some of our experiences regarding these ideas, and we're going to kind of wrap up the talk this way. So the first thing I want to do is to ask you guys about your homework. So no, it was not a long, boring documentary. It was Utopia. And as I was preparing the talk, I was thinking, well, you know what? Maybe Zootopia is kind of childish to start a talk for doctoral students, but occasionally some of these topics can get delicate and controversial. So I wanted to start in a very non-threatening way, and then we're going to move on to something a little bit more complex. So I sent you guys a worksheet in which I wanted you guys to look at the movie or watch the movie again if you already watched it, but then looking at it from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. And there were 6 things I wanted you guys to keep an eye on. The 6 main ideas. I noticed that I switched them a little bit from the handout. Anyone can be anything. People can change. Stereotypes hurt everyone. And then moving about some examples of how prejudice and fear are presented in this movie. So I'm gonna stop talking. You guys can start sharing. You can start talking about. The first one is anyone can be anything. Can somebody summarize that statement based on the movie? Where do you see it?
I can share something about it, at least from that one. I think it can be tied with the stereotypes hurt everyone. So I saw this movie when it came out. I really enjoyed it. I didn't think it was childish. I thought it was very well made. So one of the things that stood to me throughout the entire movie was Judy Hopps. So her character, she's a bunny, and throughout the movie, it was shown that bunnies can only work in, cariforms, and that's all they did. And Judy had the personality, the drive to just be whatever she wanted to be and not follow the stereotypes. So anyone can be anything. I think it's embodied by Judy Hopps.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? That's an easy one. Somebody has to remember.
Yeah, I can maybe add something.
Yes.
So yeah, like Lisa was saying, that's sort of like the mantra of the whole movie. And since Judy is the protagonist, she's really follows that logical thinking throughout the whole movie. But that way of thinking, even though she keeps that way of thinking, it changes a little because towards the end, she realizes that she has her own prejudices, and that even what she thought was like that not only predators can be savage, but at the end when she figures out the whole scheme of going on, she realized that even prey like her can be savage as well. So really anyone can be anything, but anyone can be anything good or bad. So she had her own misconceptions as well.
Okay. Well, both of you guys are correct. Anybody want to say something else?
Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Well, looking at anyone can be anything can be viewed as a perspective like the education system as it has been designed to assign people to certain labors depending on their desempeño. I mean, how do you say
performance?
Performance, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's another perspective. I know, looking at it from Zootopia, yeah, it's like an utopic view, Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, in the U.S., they used to be tracking. They used to get the slow groups, the regular groups, the groups that learn faster. And historically, once you landed in the slow group, it was really hard for you to move on. And sometimes you landed there for the wrong reason. You are more likely to be in a slow group at a school if you were a minority compared with some of the other groups. So yeah, anyone can be anything, but sometimes the system may peg you at a position that is going to be harder for you to reach your dreams. Anybody else want to share about anyone can be anything?
Yes, in that line, I believe that something interesting is that anyone, in case of the money, anyone with determination, specific goals, and a plan can become anything they want. So that's maybe the difference between her and other people.
Yes. So she had a plan of what she wanted to do and why and how to achieve it. Excellent. How about people can change? What characters? There were several characters that changed their life experiences, made them change in the movie. Who do you guys remember?
Nick the Fox.
Tell us a little bit about that. How you perceive that?
Well, sorry, sometimes you think that people are the way they are. They've been like that always. But when you look at the background of why people are the way they are, sometimes there's a really sad story or something that happened in, sometime within their life, and it changed who they were, or at least there's some sort of protection that they developed. So I think that Nick's character, the preconception was that foxes are, the sly, mischievous things, animals, and then you realize that Nick was not like that. He wanted to be a Boy Scout, but he was bullied, and that sometimes people change because of those things, and it's not necessarily who they are. It's just a way of protecting themselves.
Yeah. So some changes can be positive, and some can be negative. In this case, Nick went from a negative change after the experience, the bullying experience, to a positive change towards the end of the movie. Who else changes throughout the movie?
The bully from the beginning, the childhood bully.
I actually have his name. Gideon Gray.
Gideon, yeah.
Yes. So he went from a bully to being really cooperative with the family and working together. So that process also happens. Who else? One more that also changed, either positively or negatively.
The parents.
Why? Why the parents? Tell me about it.
Well, because at the beginning they were afraid of the fox, and they were like pretty like prejudiced towards like, oh my God, the city and the predators and all these people. And at the end, they ended up even working with foxes to like, improve. So yeah, the parents' perception changed thanks to the daughter, what she was doing. So.
Okay, so you can see that. And this happens also in life. You go through experiences, you learn, you improve yourself. Anybody else notice a character changing? We talk about Nick, Gideon, the parents. Anyone else?
I think I forget the name
Ah,
of the guy that was in charge of the assigned role for each police.
The bull.
the bull.
Yeah,
Is, let me see, I have his name here. Chief Bogo.
yeah, that one. He initially didn't touch it was gonna be a good officer, but then he changed and realized that she had the talent.
Okay, but notice that at the beginning, his judgment was just based on his preconceived ideas of who could be and who could not be a cop. And then after meeting and knowing the person, then some of these ideas change. And that's also true in real life. Sometimes until you meet somebody and you talk and you realize, hey, we're not that different here. You start challenging your own prejudices and biases. The next one is stereotypes can hurt everyone. What stereotypes did you see in the movie? It's a huge list I have here. I want to see what you guys thought.
I think most of the stereotypes were initially towards Judy.
Mm-hmm.
Like when she first met the guard, the receptionist guy, I forget his name in the beginning when she arrives to the precinct.
Officer Klowhauser.
Yeah, Clawhauser. He calls her cute, and she says a bunny can call another bunny cute, but when you do it, it's like that's not wrong. That's wrong.
Where have you heard that before?
I remember, like, we talk about racism, like between black people, they say it's okay to call each other something like that, but when a white person calls a black person, very these
especially with the
pejorative words, and that's not correct. So
excellent. What else? What other stereotypes you notice in the movie?
So I guess hi.
Hi.
I guess like the one that where the predators are the only ones that are considered to be able to go savage because it's in their biology and in their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of these stereotypes that kind of made everyone fear. It kind of made it easier for all the animals in Zootopia fear predators again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure you have heard that in everyday life. Some people have this idea that some races are more violent than others, or smarter than others. Those are obviously incorrect misconceptions. But the movie presents that in a really interesting way to look at. What other stereotypes do you notice? I have like 25 people online. Come on. Anyone else?
Kelvin is saying that sloths were stereotypically slow.
Mm-hmm. And the punchline at the end of the movie was perfect, right? So they're not always slow. How about prejudice? We saw the stereotypes. I made some notes here about stereotypes. The bunny was called a dumb bunny. It's sounded a little bit like a dumb blonde. Elephants have good memory, that you can throw like a bunny. Nick says that. Eubuonies are so emotional. Again, stereotypes mostly regarding bunnies, but of course you've heard that also, particularly with respect to females. Let's see, prejudice is unfair. Why is prejudice unfair? What do you think, based on the movie?
So
Can I say something
oh,
about
I
that one?
was just gonna, I don't know if this falls under this category, but, and I know at the end, the sheep, the assistant mayor who becomes the mayor at the end, I know she becomes out like the villain at the end, but in the beginning, I kind of empathize with her because every time she met Judy, she's like, "Oh, you're doing a lot for us little, us little people," and I felt like you're doing a lot for us like women in the the workforce and male-dominated workforces, and in the she was working for a lion who kind of like uh, pushed her down a lot because she was, I guess, a female and the sheep and like a prey, right? So and that she says, I think he just hired me to get the sheep vote, like the female vote, right?
The sheep vote.
So I feel like
Yeah, now
that's
in
why she
real
was like
life,
mad at him.
yeah, in real life, that would be like a really hostile environment. Imagine that you're working at a place and your boss is constantly demeaning you. There was somebody else gonna say something.
Hi, that was me.
Uh-huh.
So also Hobbs had this similar situation because at the beginning, her boss didn't really believe she should be in the force. So instead of giving her an actual case, he just put her as a meter maid. So by his prejudice of thinking her as an animal that is normally considered a prey rather than a predator, he didn't consider her capable for that type of job of a policeman. So he put her like as a meter maid.
Yeah, that, and again, when you are assigned to negative jobs or menial jobs based on your gender or some other category, that is a discriminatory practice and is illegal. How about fear always works? Any relationship with politics today is purely coincidental. Tell us a little bit about it. Fear always works.
Well, definitely the whole after the speech that Judy gave about like the biology of predators and the whole fight she had afterwards with the fox, and everybody, like the media, like just made it 10 times worse. And they interviewed like the gazelle, the one that Shakira voices, and she had like an interview, and I saw that like she was using her celebrity status platform saying like this is getting out of control, and like we can't let fear divide us, because that's exactly what was happening. It was like just taking over everybody's perspective.
Yeah, so fear is being used as a political tool, trying to separate one group against another one. And then the last one, which is positive in my way, fighting prejudice takes courage. When did you see that in the movie, and what it means to you?
Okay, I can say something about
Yes,
that.
hi.
Hi. It takes courage because Judy, confronted many barriers just to overcome the prejudice that doms are not supposed to be cops. So she was constantly kind of fighting her way into the position and the job that she wanted. That's one way. And I have here in my notes that when you become overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, you go back to your hiding place, kind of your comfort zone. So she coming back of that to fight the previous prejudice. It's kind of one way that the movie have that fighting to take courage.
Excellent. So you can see that the movie provides an interesting context to talk about some pretty difficult issues. And throughout the talk, we're going to be talking about some of those in some more detail. Let's see. Let me tell you a little story about Sandy and Fluffy. And this story kind of ties in with some of these ideas. You can read there what's going on. We have two friends, Sandy and Julie. They were walking to school. Julie was bitten by a dog. And from that time on, her friend, Sandy, started being afraid of dogs. And she was afraid of Fluffy and any other dog that will come around. The parents became concerned. They didn't want her to be afraid of dogs. However, she still kept this fear and a negative attitude towards the dogs, and eventually it kind of escalates. She eventually started carrying stones to throw at any dogs that she saw. And I have four questions for us to discuss. Was Sandy born with a genetic fear towards dogs? What do you think? Can you be born with a genetic fear towards dogs? Yes? No?
No, fear is learned, it's not an innate, it's not genetic, it's
Yes.
learned.
That is a really important point.
It's scientifically and psychologically proven that fear, it's learned.
Very good. And that's an important point. It's kind of like an obvious question, but if you think about it, some people may have a prejudice idea and they think they're born with it. And no, fear is learned. I've seen little ones, toddlers, playing with lagartijos, with little lizards, and they play just fine. And then only after they're old, they decide, somebody says, oh, they bite you, and then you get scared of them. But as toddlers, they don't. So prejudice, discriminatory thinking, all of that is learned, and it's learned early on. By age 5 or 6, little ones already have some of these ideas. Some of it comes from the media, from their parents, comments parents made, and you keep that. And if you don't challenge those ideas, you may think you were born that way, and then you were not. Number 2, even though Sandy was not actually beaten, actually that's not the right, not that type of beaten by Fluffy. Do you think that Sandy's attitude towards Fluffy is justified? The attitude towards Fluffy itself. What do you think? Is Sandy justified in fearing Fluffy?
I think it is because she saw her friend get beaten, so it makes sense that she's gonna be scared of dogs because she know what they can do.
Okay, so it's okay, Fluffy, is a kind of dangerous dog sometimes. But then we go to the next question. Can you generalize to all dogs are dangerous? In science, we call that induction. We have a sample size of 1, and then we can generalize all dogs are dangerous. Is that okay?
Of course not, because we cannot generalize. But the problem, I think, is education, because people are not educated to think that way.
Very good. So even though you may have a negative experience, that doesn't mean that you can generalize towards all other groups. And then last one, what other overgeneralizations have you personally heard? These broad ideas, these broad stereotypes. Which ones have you heard?
About how all Muslims are terrorists. I think that's like all over the media right now.
Yeah, if you're a Muslim, you must be a terrorist, right? We know it's not true, but you hear that quite a lot. What else?
Puerto Ricans are loud.
Puerto Ricans are loud. So every single one of us has huge decibels in their voice. No, we know it's not true, but you hear that a lot. What else?
One of the things that I hear often is all Hispanics are Mexican.
Yes. If you're at a supermarket and they hear you say something like habichuela in Spanish, they say, "Go back to Mexico." Yeah, and we know they are from many other countries. But yeah, that's a really a common generalization. What else? One more.
Latin
Daisy,
America. Uh-huh.
sorry. I was gonna read a few things from the chat.
Uh,
Kelvin is saying that Mexicans that are in the U.S. are criminals, which we've heard a lot about lately. African Americans are aggressive, says Daisha. And Lise is saying that you speak English very well for being Puerto Rican.
yes.
There's some other things we hear.
So they could not stop at you speak English well. They had to continue, right, to Puerto Rico. I'm not seeing the chat. I'm sorry. I cannot react to it. But Monica, thank you for pointing those out. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about some big ideas that I want you guys to remember and reflect about. Number one is the idea of culture. And culture sometimes is perceived by some to be just these tiny itty bitty details that you see quite a bit, like foods, holidays, the way you dress, or some humanistic type of expressions. But culture goes way, way deeper than that. Concepts, beliefs, symbols, values that are shared by a particular group. And this is shared through communication, right? You get educated in that culture, and you learn some of those things. And one thing that is important to remember is that culture is not just Cinco de Mayo or I don't know arroz con pollo. It's way more complicated, and some of these we cannot perceive right away, and that leads to misunderstandings between people, right? So we have the surface aspect, the dressing and the language, but then you have ideas about courtesy, concepts of time. In some cultures, being late is not that bad. In some cultures, being late is kind of rude, right? Personal space. Sometimes the conversations happens way closer or way further away, between people. Rules of conduct, facial expressions. There's one particular in Puerto Rico. I don't know if you heard. We're gonna get together closer here. If you do like this, uh, many of you may recognize that as, hey, what happened? What's going on? And that one, it's pretty unique as far as I know. Other people will see us moving our noses like that, and they will be like, "What's up?" So this type of facial expression is gonna be different, or hand gestures. And then we have the hidden culture, assumptions, and values. So all of these are an important part of interaction between people. And because we don't know what's going on at the waterline and what's going down in the hidden culture, then sometimes we get misunderstandings and a bit of communication problems. I want to differentiate between equality and equity, because equality sounds great. That means treating everybody exactly the same. And that sounds like a nice democratic ideal. But there's a difference between equality and equity. For example, many years ago, when you go on a flight, that you could request menu, right? And if you didn't say anything, you got the same menu as everybody else. And if you give the same menu to everybody, that sounds fair, but it's not, right? Somebody may have peanut allergies, milk allergies. Some people can be vegetarian. So giving the same thing to everybody is sometimes not fair. If you are not, if you happen to not be, if you don't like a particular food. So the concept of equity is very important. Equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. So some people may need a little bit more, some people may need a little bit less, and sounds unequal. But if the one that needs a lot of help doesn't get a lot of help, will not be able to move along in terms of when you compare with their peers. Let me show you this picture, which is a very nice example of the idea. We have the equality. Everybody gets one box. Sounds fair. However, the little kid over here will not be able to see the game. This is more like equity. You know, this guy may not need a box, right? So this guy may need it. And of course, we know that the one that needs the most help should get the most help so that he can be successful, in this case, watching the game. So keep that in mind, that on sometimes equality is okay. You should have equal pay regardless of your gender. That's okay. But then you have instances where equity is more important. So we've seen equity and equality. I want you guys to share. Have you experienced these two, and under what circumstances? Have you experienced equality and you thought it was okay, or you experienced equality and that didn't work out as well? Compare that with equity. Let's see. Let me hear some comments. Hello.
I have an example.
Yes. Go ahead.
But it was mainly a problem. There wasn't a solution for it. So I mean, I was taking a biochem course, and the test, the way that the structure of the sentence was written, I went to talk to the professor, and he immediately said that he knew that students that English was not their first language struggle with the way the sentences in English were written. But they didn't do anything about it. So like everybody got the same test, but not everybody spoke the same. You know, English wasn't the first language.
Yes.
Therefore, that's like equality, but it's not equity, because for the non-English speaker, the way the sentences were tricky sentences. They made it on purpose tricky in English. So the test was mainly for English-speaking people. And they knew about it, but they didn't do anything. So it was equality, but not equity in the classroom.
So we see in that case, you would have benefit more from equity, right? Maybe the person can rephrase it without giving away the answer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Who else?
I have another example.
Yes.
Okay. Special accommodations for people that need it. For example, in my comprehensive test, I have a partner that needs more time because he has anxiety problems. The people give more time to him to answer the questions. That's what's equity, but not equality.
Very good. So the person needs, there's a medical condition, needs the extra time. You give the person the extra time. Yeah. Not extra help, not open book, just a little bit of time. That is perfectly fine in terms of equity. But some people may say, but that's unfair. But in this case, equity won the day. And in fact, it is illegal. If you have a condition to be refused accommodations, there's some federal laws that talk about that. Anybody else? I heard somebody. Who are you? Hi. Somebody was going to say something.
Asleen, can you speak? She wrote something on the chat.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, she can, she doesn't have a microphone. So Asleen wrote, equality is the stipend to be a TA in a chemistry course is the same for a student with a BS in chemistry and a student with a BA in finances. So that's an example of an equal policy that might not be achieving equity.
Very good. Anyone else? Okay, well, I guess we move on to the difference between race versus ethnicity. Some people have the misconception that they're exactly the same, and they're not. Race is based on biological traits, and this is important, deemed socially significant. So it's not any trait. Currently, in the last 500 years, skin color seems to be one of those biological traits that have been used to perpetuate oppression towards minority groups. It could have been, I don't know, ear size. There is a really nice Star Trek episode. I'm kind of nerdy, in which there is this debate. There's two groups. This is a classic one. One of them had half white, half black face, but the color was in the opposite side. So you have the left white and the right white, and somehow they were fighting because they were not the right color in their face. Uh, so in that case, it happens to be where the white and where the black is located. It's completely nonsensical. And yet we use it a lot. We see it a lot in society. So biological traits are more related to the concept of race, and ethnicity is related more to culture. So some of these ethnic differences you learn, some of the racial traits you inherit. But in any case, race is a social construct. Race is not purely biological. We as a society decide what traits happen to be preferred and which ones happen not to be preferred. So race, the concepts of race in particular, are socially created. They are not backed by any real biology. There's no group that's matter. There's no group that's stronger. There's no one group that can do better on standardized tests compared with another just based on biological traits. And that's an important point to remember. Then we have prejudice versus discrimination. Prejudice is in your head. As long as you don't say, as long as you don't mention anything, you have these ideas in your head about specific groups. Notice that it's covert, but those prejudices can become overt, can become actions. Those actions are discriminatory. So prejudice is in your head, discrimination is an action, it's something you can see and that you experience. And of course, both of them are related. If you have a prejudice thought against a particular group, you are more likely to act in ways that might be unfair to that particular group. You can see on your screen all different types of isms that people use to justify incorrectly discrimination based on class, based on whether you're bodily able or not, based on race, based on caste or class, based on your age, based on your gender, based on your sexuality, based on your size, if you're skinny, if you're fat. So all of these are possible ways in which people can be discriminated, right, actions, and those are based on these prejudice thoughts or ideas. Even though you may have a prejudice idea in your head, it turns out that some of those can lead to actions. Here, I just added this slide a couple of days ago. I just became aware of this article in which they were given a sample of people were given a survey, and men with black sounding names are perceived to be physically large, more dangerous, and more violent than people with white sounding names. Without even looking at a person, some people have a prejudice thought of regarding to race. That is consistent with many other studies. I don't know if you heard about this one. Job applicants with black sounding names are less likely to get called back. So what they did in the study, they sent the same resume, right, the same thing, with different names out to companies. And they noticed that the callback rate was higher for Craig and Steve, and not for some of the more ethnic sounding names. So prejudice and discrimination go hand in hand. I'm going to show some examples of prejudice language in the media. When Obama was running for president in 2007, Joe Biden made a comment, and I'm quoting here. I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a really nice looking guy. And that sounds like something positive, but it's not. What is the implication when Joe Biden said for mainstream African American, wow, he's articulate, wow, he's bright, wow, he's clean, nice looking? What is the implication there?
That he's an exception to the rule.
He's an
It's a
exception.
surprise.
Exactly. Somehow that was really noteworthy. So we see that there's still people with some negative prejudices. So that one came out from CNN. This one is about Asian culture. You cannot summarize Asian culture in a dish. So it's overgeneralizing and this idea of culture, right? This is an ad for pancakes. See if you can find the prejudice idea. She got, that's the child, her smile from her mom, her eyes from her grandmother, and her pancakes from Aunt Jemima. What's missing?
Her dad.
Who?
Her dad.
The dad, yes. The father is not there. Why couldn't he get her eyes from his father? And the implication is, right, this incorrect idea about single African American mothers, that there's more of them, and that somehow, sends prejudice thoughts. So you can see a little bit of that in that commercial. This story about sexism, you don't have to get bikini, clad ladies to sell engine treatments. This is a commercial from Perry Ellis. You don't have to get a half-naked woman to sell perfume. So, but you see a lot of sexism in the media this way. This is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That one is a little bit more subtle. I want you to compare the face of Snow White with the face of the dwarfs and the face of the old person. What did you notice?
The big nose.
Mm-hmm. So you have all the dwarfs with these over exaggerated features, the old lady that way, and then you see Snow White, right? So in a way, this is a little bit demeaning towards little people, ageism you see here. How about this one? Feel young, eat a burger, yay! So what is the implication? Who cannot eat burgers? Based on the commercial. Old people. Yeah, why not? See? So we see some of these, it's really subtle, some of these subtle ideas. This one is not subtle. On the left, two residents wade through chest deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. However, the young man walks through chest deep flood water after looting a grocery store. So this was Hurricane Katrina. And of course, the white couple there is finding food and the black person is looting. And the picture looked pretty much the same, right? So you can see some of that still in the media. How about this one? Can you imagine Batman dressed like Wonder Woman that way? And see, some people don't challenge these ideas. Why she has to be half naked, right? And you can see how ridiculous that would look if it were a man. Could you see a bit of a, the
And
treatment? Yes.
And also that women in comic books are also drawn in sexually suggestive poses that are very unrealistic. It was funny because I was watching like a BuzzFeed video actually where they asked women to like pose as comic book characters, and they were like, this is impossible for me to do. Like, I can't bend my body that way, but that's what sells, I guess, and the male characters, you don't see them do that.
Yeah.
The male strong, powerful poses, of course.
See, you can see Green Lantern back here and Batman. You don't see them like that, right? So you're right, but you still see some of these images that have this prejudiced thoughts. So I want you to tell me, and you guys have been pretty quiet, so I want other people to share their opinions. Have you seen biased language on television, in the movies? Have you been treated that way? Have you been labeled that particular way, in a prejudice bias way? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. What I study is psychology, and usually when that type of prejudice happens, it's a defense mechanism. It could be called a projection, especially the last one. Like if the Flash was dressed as a woman, you could interpret that as a repressed feeling, or if the person wants to dress like a woman, but he doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen. It's not necessary. It could be used as a defense mechanism. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Have you been labeled in a particular way? Have you seen biased language on television, movies, internet?
Well,
yes. So,
I just want to say that it's changing a little bit now, but for a long time, toys have always been geared towards either girls or boys.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then there was recently like a Barbie commercial where there was finally like a boy literally playing with a Barbie. And it's like, some people it was shocking, but for many years, that's how the toy industry worked.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Ibelis, you're going to say something?
yes. I have had a few experiences here. One of the very first ones was when I was doing rotations and I picked my lab. One of the students from my program a year ahead said, oh yeah, I knew that will fit better for you. And one of the reasons is because we're a diverse group. We have Asians, we have Latin Americans, as well as US natives.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was like, what are you trying to say?
Yeah.
In our group, like everyone do their own thing. So she wanted to make, like they're all white people, as she want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't fit in their group. That same person,
that's terrible. Yeah.
I heard making a comment one time saying that another student was not a good fit. Well, I never liked her. She was kind of weird, and she doesn't seem to fit in the program because she comes from the mountains and up in Vermont, I think. So she's like from somewhere else that does not fit the liberal Colorado.
Wow.
And then another was a Chinese guy that made a comment that he does not like to sit and talk to girls because they all talk about stupid things like clothing and makeup.
Mm-hmm. So you have experienced 3. Wow.
And that's just coming up top of my head, but I think I had more encounters. A lot of people talk about visas and oh, you speak really well in your accent compared to others,
mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So
okay, so it's really subtle, but it's there, right? You can tell that they're thinking in a way, that is a little bit prejudiced. Anybody else?
So I wanted to share that I've been recently a little bit more with that sexual harassment, because I realized that one of my friends here suffer of that. So recently it's been all this issue with the Stanford swimmer that he was only like
6 months in the jail to rape that girl, and then he just came after the 3 months. And then there's been a lot of like that is basically because white male privilege, and the same as this. Recently, CNN, I think this week, post something about it, that there was a judge saying that that the rape was because of her, because she could not keep their knees together.
Wow.
And then so I was like, that's not what you should think about it. But yeah, so living in Texas, that's kind of normal to hear, and I'm really tired of that. So that's a little things more mainstream that been coming during this recent month.
Yeah, so we have all kind of experienced some of these. You may not remember, you may not want to share, but we have. So we know that it happens. Not everybody is nice and welcoming, and we need to make sure that, within that context, we can still do our job and do our best and keep a positive environment. Let me show you some cool stories. When you start seeing some of the multiculturalism coming out and growing, then the social media sometimes gets kind of crazy. I don't know if you remember the case of the little girl, the Cheerios commercial. This girl, her mom was white and her father was black, and it was a Cheerios commercial. And that there were some people in social media fussing about why do you want to show that on television? Wow, a biracial couple. This boy is American. He was born in the U.S. and he was singing the national anthem, and he got flagged because he was using a mariachi costume because she happens to be Mexican American. Again, social media, a little bit of a backlash there. She was Miss America a few years ago, and you can see some of the reactions from Twitter. Congratulations, Al-Qaeda, or Miss America is one of you. Asian or Indian, are you kidding? This is America. So you can see some of these comments coming out. I would like to think they're the minority and that things are improving, but you can still see some of these around. This group of students at a New York school were, practicing different languages. So they recite the Pledge of Allegiance just in Arabic, not in English. Again, a big backlash because you translated the Pledge of Allegiance. So we can see that there's some efforts that are going on and that sometimes media reacts negatively. So have you seen examples of backlash, trolling, you trying to improve, you want to get a better life, and then you see some people kind of, pushing you down? I think if Elise mentioned one example. Any other ones that have happened to you personally or that you've seen?
I can add something.
Yes.
When I was in Michigan, we were at the grocery store, and we were 3 girls, and we wanted to go through the 20 or less articles. But one of the girls went to look for something she was missing, so I started putting everything, and it looked like I had a big, a big grocery store list or whatever. And this guy comes and he's like, "Really? You don't know how to count? This is 20 or less." And she shows me, and I'm like, I am putting together 3 different people's groceries.
Yes.
And he was so upset. And so that was like, like a gender difference aggression. And you add to on top of that he's white. So
yeah,
that made it. That made it for me that day.
You're right. Yeah. Anyone else? Geez, this is a quiet group. Let's see. Well,
I can go.
Yes, go ahead.
So the first thing I experienced was when I was 12 years old. That's when I moved to the U.S. from Bolivia. That's where I'm from. I was in the bilingual program in 8th grade, but I did have English classes like math and other things. I knew math, but I since I didn't speak English that well, I didn't really know what the professor was talking about. So he put this white Caucasian student to tutor me, and he didn't really speak Spanish, so I still couldn't understand what was going on. So then he looks at me in a bad way. He's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from Bolivia." And he's like, "Oh, okay, that's why." So just because of that class, they wanted to put me, in 6th grade. But thank God I have very outgoing and supportive parents, and didn't allow that. So just because I didn't speak English, they thought like somebody comment, if you don't speak English, people think you're dumb.
That's absolutely right. So you try to improve your life, get better, and sometimes you get hit with these sort of ideas. Well, let's talk briefly about multicultural education, what it is. Multicultural education is a process of reform. We want to challenge these old school ideas of discrimination. We reject discrimination, we challenge it, and we recognize that we accept, we value racial differences, ethnic differences, linguistic differences, religious differences, economic differences. So in a school where you have people thinking about multiculturalism, it's okay to be of different racial groups. It's okay to speak a different language. It's okay if you're rich or poor and nobody gets discriminated at. This is an ideal that we should strive for because everybody should have the opportunity in the U.S. to be successful, regardless of their racial, ethnic, linguistic background. And it's a process that can be part of the curriculum. So some materials may show signs of prejudice, and you need to, challenge that and modify the material so that you get a positive learning environment for all of your students. The concept of multicultural education is relatively recent. Before 1960s, we have a big Americanization process. You can see the figure here, the idea of the melting pot, that you put all of these foreign people in a pot and they will blend and lose some of their culture and will lose some of their identity to become American. And we know that it happened in Native American communities. Strong push for English, strong push against their culture. We know that it happened in Puerto Rico during the 1910s, 1930s, all the way to the 1930s. You heard that in Puerto Rico, English was the language in schools. And you see stories like the famous story of the Santa Clova la Cuchilla. Remember Alejandro Diaz Alfaro? That's Pello Merced is another of his stories. A guy teaching English in elementary school without a single word of English, right? We know that has changed over time, but during that process of removing those multicultural indicators, we see the effect in languages. Some of the Hawaiian people now are struggling to keep their language, their native language. Same in Native American nations. So we see how traditions are starting to get lost. We see how people may think that because they don't speak English, they're less than. We see effects in school completion. We see that, in an environment that is not supportive to people of different races, different ethnicities, different groups, some of the kids are going to struggle and they're going to get farther and farther behind. That has started to change. I'm not going to say here, wow, it's all multicultural now. But starting in the 60s with the civil rights movement, African American women movement, liberation movement, we're trying to see a little bit of that multiculturalism and respect permeating society. Is better than it was 50 or 60 years ago, but it's still a lot of work to do. And I want to emphasize the idea of multicultural education as affirmation, solidarity, and critique. You will hear when you hear about multicultural education, sometimes thinking about tolerance. Look at that cartoon there. That cartoon, the chicken says, I love you. The other chicken says, I tolerate you. Tolerance is not the best feeling towards a person of another race, of another group, or a different religion, or a different ethnicity. So we want to move past just tolerating people that are different and go towards respect and affirmation. And that process needs to permeate the classroom and the learning environment. So we know now that the US is starting to become more cross-cultural, more multicultural. As a teacher, you need to be aware of that. Each student in your classroom is going to have his own unique culture. There are commonalities, of course, but there are going to be important differences. And you should not have assumptions of people without knowing where they come from. So it is a complex process. Not only you need to teach the content, but you need to teach it in such a way that is inclusive for all, so that everybody has the best chance of succeeding in a class. And Corey is going to give you a little bit more detail about that. So I want you to tell me about your experience as a student. Do you have particularly good teachers, particularly good professors that were supportive? How did they do it? And if you have any negative experience, a teacher, a professor who was not, was kind of biased, I would like to hear that as well. I want to see both sides here. Who wants to start? Hi, still there?
Hi.
Yes.
Okay, so from my perspective, I don't feel like I have a Caucasian professor. I never felt that he has treated me differently and he has given me the same. Like, I'm only his only student. So I feel like he has pushed me and given me, the best opportunities. But there is also a lack of understanding because there's no one in the program that is Hispanic. I'm the only Hispanic student. So then I'm not sure, is it okay? I'm being treated equally. I think so, but I can't compare myself because I don't have any other models over here or like any other Hispanics professors that I can try to talk to see whether they are biased or not biased. I feel like I try to think that anything that has happen, it's in terms of merit and not my race, but sometimes it's hard to tease those two out. So I don't know if that's helpful to the conversation, but
no, and that's a good point. Sometimes your perception is important. Maybe the person is not doing it purposely to hurt, but it's it's an important point. Yes, who else?
I can go.
Yes.
So I have this professor who is the program director, and we have taken several classes together. And he will, when I will say something, a comment, or ask a question, he will turn his head like this and make facial expressions like he doesn't understand it. And that in turn make me more nervous. And because I was doubting myself, am I not speaking well? What's going on? And it was everything because of my accent. And years later, and when I had my first class that I taught in the university, he said, "Oh, how's that class going? With your accent and all." And that made me so mad because I have to explain. I had professors who spoke English in the University of Puerto Rico. And I had no trouble understanding, so it's going well. I'm explaining myself, and people ask me questions if they need to. So it's kind of frustrating.
It is. I can tell you, I have been living in the US since 1998. And I still have an accent. And occasionally people make comments about the accent. And I have the accent. So what? So it's one of those things that's just part of who I am. And that should be respected, right? Any other?
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
I kind of lost my accent, and for me it's the opposite because then they say, "Oh, you don't have any accent at all." So what? Am I not Puerto Rican because I don't have an accent? So damn if you do, and damn if you don't. So sometimes you win.
I had a similar experience like Lise.
Uh-huh.
When I came here, my first year I was rotating, and I was talking to one of the other students in the lab. And I told her, she was asking me more about like where I came from and where I went to undergrad. And I told her Puerto Rico. She had no idea I was from Puerto Rico. Like, oh, you speak English really well. And I didn't expect that because I guess I don't look like her typical Puerto Rican, tanned and no accent. And English is my first language. So I took it as humorous. I don't know. I don't perceive a lot of biases like that, but I did see like her whole like background on me that she had on me changed a second. I'm like, okay, this is funny. But to me, this was funny, but I can see how that happens.
Yeah, I mean, some people take it a little bit in stride, but for other people, it is offensive, and that's something you need to be thinking about. Any other experiences with faculty, professors, fellow students, supportive?
I have one. Wait.
Liz, I'm Liz. Who's talking? I don't know who's talking.
Oh, Naisha.
Naisha, you go first. I'll go next.
Okay, thank you. Well, here in Puerto Rico, it's very common that if you are not from UPR, then you're not a good student. That's one example.
Yeah.
And the second one is that here in our school, we take a couple of courses with the MD students, PhD and MD students. And the exams for them are multiple choice, and we have another section that is essays. We have to write essays. So I remember that once I asked to one of our professors, like, all right, so should we focus in some topics, because we have essays? And he's like, oh, well, you're a PhD, you should know everything. So, we were like, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was not really helpful, right?
So it's like, when he was comparing PhD students with MD students, and like, all right, go and you are a PhD student, yeah, so go, you know everything.
Yeah, so you have, again, these prejudice ideas of who knows, who doesn't, right? Liz, you're going to say something?
Yes, about an experience with the professor. It's positive, at least for me, and how he reached out to a group of us. When I started at the University of Rochester, I was a prep student, so that's like that year that you take between your university to grad school, and I had something similar, and a group of us had something similar what Daisha had, which is sometimes questions in exams were very tricky. So I was taking this immunology course, and a group of us who were in the prep program who also happened to be Puerto Rican. We came to the professor and said, you know what, we had some issues with the questions, and I think sometimes we don't understand the question, and sometimes we feel that we don't want to go and say, hey, I just don't understand the question. So what he did was he would tutor us. He would take like an hour every week at the end of the week to sit down with us and then explain a little bit further. And if there were any questions that we had that we didn't feel comfortable asking in the classroom, we would. So I think that was very positive because in the end, it just made feel that he was very interested in us succeeding, and he was a very busy professor. So for him to do that, it was just go, over, what was needed for, the course. So I think that he wanted to reach as much as possible, and he was very knowledgeable from that point on that language can be a barrier to understanding and performance. And even now he's still very aware of that. So I really appreciate him, and it set a good note for that course, at least for us that were in that group.
Okay, very good. I think I like that we end with in a positive note. Let's go ahead and take a look at some suggestions. I'm running out of time, but some general suggestions to creating inclusive learning environment. You need to know and understand your own culture and your own stereotypes. Very few people have zero stereotypes. And if you recognize your own stereotypes, then you can challenge them, and then you can consciously decide not to treat people differently. But you need to kind of know yourself a little bit. The other one is this idea of color blindness. Remember equity and equality? Oh, I don't see race, I don't see color. Well, you kind of should, because that tells you a little bit about the person, and it would allow you to explore in depth what are the groups or the person's particular needs, right? And not to assume one thing or another. Keep track of your own biases. Sometimes people make off the cuff remarks that may be trivial for the person, but can be offensive. So always think before you talk, especially if you're referring, towards a person from another group. Be welcoming, know your students, talk to them. You will not know who these students are if you don't take care of them. You need to be caring and talk a little bit about their background, their experiences. You will learn a lot of important things that can help you tailor the class and become a better instructor. This one is a pet peeve of mine. If you're teaching a section, you should be able to pronounce your student's full name correctly. I know that there are Asian students who change their name to English names. Is that their decision? That's okay. Personally, I don't think that's appropriate. I call my students to call me Dr. Wilson, even though my full name is Dr. Gonzalez Espada. But I will not tell them to call me Dr. X or Dr. W just because they don't know how to say my full name. So, and same applies for other groups. Interact with all students equally. You don't want to have, more interaction with one student than another, because some students may feel left out, may feel that you do not care. So just keep track of that. It's a little bit unconscious sometimes, but you need to consciously keep track of it. Never, never, ever, ever you humiliate a student or the language or the accent, like one of you guys mentioned, or the culture or the ways dressed or the customs, right? If there is a situation where there's a custom or something or a comment, you should talk to the person in private, right? Instead of a big group. And then you can figure out if there's any difference or any misunderstandings. You want to have high expectations for your students. However, they may not be identical. Remember the idea of equity. Some people may need some extra help. Some people may not. If there is a comment in your classroom made by another student, you should make a comment about that. Don't let it slide, because if you let it slide, the implication is that you agree with that negative comment. So you need to stop for a second and say, hey, that was inappropriate. Please refrain from making that type of remarks towards a particular group or a particular person. Check your materials. I've seen a lot of science books that have very few female scientists in them, very, very few Latina scientists in them. So you may want to supplement, or you may know additional anecdotes of female scientists or Latina scientists that you can use in your class. Active engagement is really important. Lecturing is not for everyone. Not everybody learns just by hearing. So the more interactive activities you have, the better you will be able to reach your students, because it turns out we all learn differently. There's something called multiple intelligences. Some people learn visually. Some people learn by touching. Some people learn by socially interacting. So by making your class as varied in terms of learning activities and experiences, the better you will be able to reach everyone. And also same with assessments. If you can combine different types of assessments, multiple choice, true, false, short answer, describe, explain, the more you can add, the better. If you do only multiple choice or only short answers, not everybody is strong in some of those areas. So let me go ahead and close real quick with this important
Hey,
sentence.
Wilson.
Yes.
Before you you move to close, something else that I think often people don't think about, and I include myself in that, when they're thinking about how to make their practices more inclusive, is like presentations. Like they use a lot of red and green in presentations. There's lots of people that can't see those colors at all or can't see them well. So also be mindful that, you know, there will be students, or there will be people, and, you know, not necessarily students, but there will be people in your audience that may have may see things differently. They have color blindness, or have issues seeing some particular colors. Also, some people have issues like they process information differently. So some people, you know, may feel like you're going too fast because it takes them a little longer to process the information. I've also heard about, you know, people that are extroverts versus introverts. Like, don't try to push the student to be like, give me an answer. Some people, it takes them a little longer to process information so that they can give you a response. So those are other things that people have to keep in mind to make sure that their teaching and their speaking, their public speaking in general is inclusive.
And that's a good point, because some people think of culture in terms just of race or ethnicity. Being different in any way is cultural, and that includes some of the examples that Monica mentioned in terms of the learning styles and the temperament and the personality. This, of course, you can read. You want to care about your students' success. You don't have to love them. You do need to make sure that you do the best that you can, so that all of your students can be successful. And I have one more slide, and I know there's a lot of people that are listening. So I want you guys to tell me a little bit of feedback. What was the most important idea, the most important concept that we just discussed, as a way to summarize our interaction today? Who wants to go first?
I can go. Multicultural education, I think that was a big part of it. Just learning these important concepts that will guide our multicultural education or framework in our teaching. Knowing about racism, prejudice, stereotypes, and how that can affect and bias in our teaching, and how we can implement different multicultural strategies.
Okay, very good. You share a lot of ideas. Good, yes.
I really like the idea of equality and equity. I teach a class of undergrads, a lab, and that's really helpful. Now on, it's really good to keep an eye on who are the ones that need the most help, because, you know, in this case, not everybody will need to be treated equally, like that.
Okay, very good. Yes, who else? One thing that sticks in your mind from this talk.
Me, that we have to become conscious about our own prejudices in order to make something about it.
Yeah, you cannot act on something you don't know, right? So you need to know yourself so that you can control yourself and any impulse you may have to, you know, act in a way that might be prejudiced. Okay, one more, and then we'll move on to the next section. No one learned anything else? Really? Well, all right. I guess that's
when preparing to give at least a lesson, remember everybody, or at least try to make it as broad as possible to include anyone. with special interests or necessities.
Yeah. Remember, not everybody thinks like you, learns like you. So don't assume that everybody will react the way you react. You need to always be cognizant of other people and their needs and
Oh yeah, it's something that it's legal now, that you need to do it if you're preparing a lesson, a lesson plan. So you have to include all the students when it's so yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is my time. I have a meeting for the faculty senate in just a little bit. I will stick around because I wanna to see Corey's presentation. But at some point, you'll see me leaving. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the comments that I received. I know that some of you guys may not want to discuss publicly, and that's perfectly fine. I really wish you the best. And I think we're going to have this PowerPoint available for you guys so that you can review it as needed. And if you have any questions, any comments, any feedback, any assistance, let me know. I am at the Morehead State University, Morehead, Kentucky, and Giovanna can get you my contact information. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much, Wilson. All right. How is everybody feeling? Let's use the raise your hand function if you feel like you need to have a 10-minute break. So raise your hand if you want a short break before we move on to the next section. All right. I'm seeing quite a few hands. So I think we're going to take a 10-minute break. So we're going to be back here at 2:42 p.m. and we'll see you soon. All right?
Okay.
Gracias, Wilson.
Cómo no, a las órdenes.
Gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Gracias.
Bye.
How's everybody doing? Tired? Most people had lunch. Let's hope so. I saw
Yes.
one moment that someone had to run get lunch and it was very far away, so. Lunch.
It's cold where I am, really, really cold. And I forgot my my coat. So I'm in Rochester, which is normally cold. So fall's coming, or it's here.
Is it the case that your building hasn't turned the heat on yet?
Well, the office I am right now, it's a planetarium, so they have it on max because we're expecting a lot of people this evening. So yes, the answer to your question is no. They don't turn it on. They just full air conditioner.
Got it. I'm excited. I've never been to Rochester, but I'll be there in a few weeks, October 17th. I'm going there.
Rochester, Minnesota, or Rochester, New York? New York. All right, because there's the Rochester. So that's funny because people confuse Rochester, Minnesota. So people think that Mayo Clinic is in Rochester, New York. So there's two Rochesters.
And are you in New York or Minnesota then?
New York.
Okay.
So you're gonna be here. What university or what?
It's the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning, CERTL.
Oh, the CERTL. Yeah, at the University of Rochester.
That's right. So the University of Rochester CERTL, well, they're hosting the national CERTL meeting in October.
Oh, awesome. I took a MOOC with them, so a massive online open course. And that's how I know about the CERTL. So they do teaching as research too.
Yeah, so at Yale, we were just accepted into the network and we're trying to figure out how to establish teaching at research projects here.
Mm-hmm.
Try to figure out how to advertise them. It provides more training opportunities. But
Awesome, that's good. So they're good people. I know some of the faculty involved, and they're pretty awesome. I think they have a really good group.
Great, thank you. I'm excited. I was excited before. Now I'm even more excited. But
oh yeah, it's pretty awesome. I'm not. Well, I'm a little biased, but I'm okay biased to it. It's a really good group. So.
Okay, so I think it's been about 10 minutes. We have our second section. Dr. Corey Kucera from Yale University is going to be talking about strategies for scientific teaching. So take it away, Corey.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is going to feel at first like we're switching gears a bit. I want to tell you we're not. So don't forget everything that you were just thinking, just talking about, these really big ideas. Hold on to them. We're going to take them and really use a lens of just teaching. So narrow down from culture, workplace, and bring, but still with an eye towards your individual experiences. Now we're going to use the lens of teaching exclusively, but we're not completely switching gears. And so to start off, I want to thank you very much for those who contributed, and I got to know you a little bit during Wilson's session. I really enjoyed getting to know you. I'd like you to know a little bit about me. We'll only know each other for a few hours, but just as Wilson ended with, if you ever do want to reach out to me or I can be of help, I want to make that offer right away. So who am I? Well, I have a lot of identities, as everybody does, especially in a power dynamic like teaching and learning. I'm a woman. I prefer being called by my first name, so please call me Corey. If I had to pick a pronoun, I would pick she because I'm not used to answering to any other pronoun. I identify as white. It's another identity I carry. For now, I'm able-bodied. That's because I'm 33 years old if you jumped ahead. And there will be a time maybe when I won't be, and I will appreciate the accommodations we have in our society then. I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in biochemistry that I earned in 2010. I was then a teacher, so I taught for 4 years in Yale College, during which time I became a mother. And I'm also fairly proud or at least scarred or impacted by living in different norms in the US. And I won't necessarily call them cultures in the US, but Southern California is a very different place than Michigan, right there in the Bible Belt. And the city of Chicago was a very different place than Connecticut. And the norms of people in all of these places were very different. So I've had the luxury of spending about 10 years of my life in each place, which brings me to today. So that is me in one slide, and nobody can be captured in one slide, but I think it's important to me as a teacher, a facilitator of knowledge, to acknowledge that when we teach, it's a very human endeavor. Scientists especially like to think of teaching as a transfer of knowledge, and knowledge as pure and untainted by the humanities or maybe even social science, but we are people talking to people. So please feel free to know me. So what do we need today for the rest of our session? Well, your continued interest, questions, and creativity. Please bring those to the table. You need some access to Google Documents, and I want this system because I really want to capture your excellent ideas and create a collaborative resource you can use in the future. One of my goals today is that you take a lot of things away from here, including others' ideas, and that you build off of other people's ideas. We also will use the ability to break into small groups for discussion and then return to the main group. And for that, I'm going to ask you to watch time, keep track of time so that we can break efficiently and return efficiently. And during the small group work is really where you will get to synthesize the knowledge that you learned from Wilson with what we're going to talk about in teaching next. So my learning objectives for you today, and learning objectives are specific measurable statements about what people will be able to do. So it's not, a learning goal is I would want you to become better teachers. But that's not something that I can easily measure or assess or have you take a quiz to determine if you're now a better teacher. Nor would I ever want to do that, because teaching is a personal journey and you will become the teacher you want to be with practice. Learning objectives, on the other hand, are measurable outcomes. So I do want, by the end of this session, for you to be able to summarize key research-based arguments for active and collaborative learning in a STEM classroom. I would want you to be able to categorize existing assessment questions using Bloom's taxonomy levels as a useful tool, and we'll practice that. And I want you to be able to explain key contrasts between backwards and traditional lesson planning or course design. And we're going to practice this as well. And we're going to practice to reach the goal that you'll be empowered and equipped to do these things. And finally, I'd like you to identify appropriate active or collaborative learning strategies for students, using what we're going to talk about, and then again, pulling back the excellent wealth of information that Wilson talked about. Okay, so to get started, here's our session outline. We have 5 buttons to press or objectives, things we're going to do, activities we'll do to get towards those objectives. The first thing I want to discuss is, why do we teach science? And so in order to do that, I'm going to open one of the collaborative documents that you'll have in your folder. And I invite you, everybody here, to open the collaborative document as well. In the folder called 15 September Scientific Teaching, you will find this document, Collaborative Questions. Now, if you don't want to open that document and you want to shout out your questions or put them in the chat menu in Zoom, that's acceptable as well. But at this point, I want to turn it over, and you can voice why, and I'll type, or please add, why do we teach science? What is your answer to this question?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because science is not something that you innately know, and you need to learn it, and someone else has to teach you science, how to do science.
Thank you very much. I think I caught it all. Liz.
Kari, I think the document is for view only, so I haven't been able to write anything because I don't have access to write.
Thank you very much. That is super helpful. I'm going to change that right now. And please forgive me for that.
That's okay.
All right. Did that work?
Everybody has to reload the page again.
Perhaps it's being a bit slow. Okay, it looks like that worked. Well, I'll tell you what, let us not have technology. Oh, there we go.
Oh, everything just jumped in. I was going to say, Daisha wrote on the chat, we teach to learn the basics so we can build on the previous knowledge and move forward to new discoveries. I'll type that, copy and type that in.
I love seeing all the anonymous animals typing. It's like a dinosaur, a llama, a fox.
Let's see, keep going, because this is a wonderful resource to go back to be inspired by, to get ideas from.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to start reading, but don't stop to listen to me. To understand basic aspects of our daily life, absolutely. To promote analytical thinking, use a scientific method on a daily basis, because even when you are not interested in studying science, anonymous dinosaur, I shouldn't have started the one that was still going. It impacts every aspect of your life. I'm going to guess that last one's life. We teach science to instill a sense of critical thinking for the everyday world. Absolutely. To teach respect of who we are and of our surroundings. Absolutely. We teach to learn the basics so we can build on previous knowledge and move forward to new discoveries. Yeah, and I might add, the discoveries that need to be made in the future might be the discoveries that save our lives. If there's a new virus, or you know, it's hard to expect the challenges we might face as a society, but historically science has answered those challenges. More than taught, learning science is something that has to be experienced and practiced. Amen to that. I mentioned already, I'm a mother, and I have the joy of watching my very young children do experiments in their daily life. And sometimes the experiment is taking something and throwing it off the table to make sure that mommy will still go pick it up. They're testing my learned behavior. They've trained me just like a dog. If they throw it, I'll go pick it up. Sometimes it's pushing over a glass of milk to see if the milk will always spill. But science is absolutely something we practice, so that people understand how do we acquire new knowledge and how that knowledge has been proved. That's right. I think one thing young scientists bring to the table is this belief that theories are truth. And one thing teachers are constantly doing is talking about how science isn't done. Theories are evolving and changing, what has been proved and what has not been proved. And making a space for the next generation of scientists to prove new things, to make new discoveries. Let's see, to be able to share your experiences and formation as a scientist with others in a way that expands their present knowledge and gives new views that they had never seen before. Absolutely. So opening horizons for people can change their views, and with changed views, you can change people's lives and create more opportunities for individual people. To teach critical thinking and curiosity to our children and future scientists, yes. To teach, I'm going to let Anonymous Mink finish. To teach others about different aspects of science and diseases. Absolutely. And I think that the diseases part is harkening back to, it says very well what I tried to say earlier about anticipating new things that threaten humanity and being able to find cures and answers and alleviate pain and alleviate burdens of suffering. Certainly that falls under diseases. Because science is fun. I agree, yes. Thank you for the emoji. I like it. I like teaching science to my niece to help inspire her to think about her experiences and learn better. And this comment is one of the first that is bringing in I like. And so the prompt was, why do we sort of offering the societal aspect? Why do we as a society want science? And thank you to the person who said, the reason I like it is it's a connection to one person I care a lot about, specifically a niece. We teach to provide useful tools and to empower people with knowledge that they can apply in particular situations and to make sense of a reality. Absolutely, absolutely. And so I'm going to go back to the presentation. You can keep this up, keep adding to it. I think this is a wonderful start. And one thing that I'll underpin one more time is that science is a human endeavor. A lot of these, almost all of these comments are traced back to things society needs, things we need, critical thought, transferable skills that help people. And some of you talked about specific diseases and specific pieces of knowledge, but also about the process of science. And I think that's really important to keep an eye on as well, is that science is a process. It's something you do, and it's necessarily a human process and communicated by people. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay, everybody's back on our session outline now, right? Okay, we're gonna talk about how people learn. Well, we talked about why do we teach science. We're gonna talk about how people learn. So thinking about how people learn helps us think about how we teach. That's the purpose of this discussion. There are a lot of theories of learning. I'm going to talk to you about evidence-based theories. And what that means is that the theories, what we're going to talk about next, have been published and proven in different classrooms with different people on studying different subjects. And if anybody wants more literature than I have at the bottom of these slides, I'm happy to provide that. But I want you to know that when we talk about the theory of constructivism, well, it is a theory, it's highly supported by evidence. So the theory of constructivism I will put forth is how people learn based on the evidence. And that is that knowledge and knowing exists in the mind as a conceptual framework comprised of facts, views, beliefs, emotions, and skills. And so this cartoon here on this slide doesn't do it justice. This is not trying to be neurons in a neural network. This is trying to provide a cartoon view of a lot of complicated things with connections between them, creating a scaffold or a framework of knowledge. Now, all of these things, these facts, views, beliefs, skills, are connected to context. So they don't exist outside of the context in which they were experienced. And they exist in varying degrees of relationship and with various degrees of organization and with various degrees of strength and persistence. And so if this cartoon is working for you, great. If you want to imagine sort of the cartoony view of the brain of neurons, neural connections forming and firing, you can view it that way. But the point is to view knowledge and knowing as existing in a state that is ever changing and that is very context dependent and that has a lot of things in it. And so when we think about our students' minds, and we think about what we know and what they don't know and how we want to put everything we know sort of into their mind, you need to realize it's not going into an empty space. It is not an empty bowl and you put the knowledge in and then they can use it and life is better and we've accomplished these wonderful goals that we wrote into the collaborative document. But that students bring to the table very rich experiential knowledge. Some of it is completely factually sound, and some of it are what we might call misconceptions. And so I like the cartoon you're looking at now, or not cartoon, these two pictures you're looking at now, this analogy for learning, if you will, that factual knowledge, these things that all the knowledge we want to put into students' heads as rocks, and that it's the students who are going to take those rocks and build something worthwhile out of those rocks. The students are going to use the raw material to build an understanding or a conceptual framework, fundamentally their own conceptual framework of understanding. So you give people the tools and you give them the opportunity, but they do the building. And so constructivism, related back to the word construct, is that the students are doing the work of learning. You provide a situation and they do the work of learning. And so science is built up of facts as a house is with stones, but a collection of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. And so part of what teaching science is teaching the knowledge, but also the connections between them, or at least helping students make those connections between them so that they can build their own conceptual frameworks. And that, studies have shown over and over again, is where students have lasting knowledge, what we call actual learning happen. That is months or years out of your class, they will remember what you said or be able to use it and apply it in a useful way. And that's very different than memorizing something and spitting it out on an exam. And so what does this look like in a real context? I'm still going to use these cartoons, but I want to give you an idea of how this might actually play out. And you will probably recognize the next situation as something you've experienced or you've seen happen with your students. And so I want you to consider the prior knowledge students bring with its connections, and it's very context specific, and a piece of new knowledge that you might want to introduce to them. And so 3 things can happen. You tell them the new knowledge, it doesn't fit at all, it doesn't make any sense, and it bounces right off. So we're going to call that case A. Case B is where this new knowledge fits in, but it's put in the periphery because the student really doesn't know how it connects to what they already know. So they don't store it very strongly. And so this is the case of memorizing for the exam, spitting something out, passing the test. But if you test a student a year later or in that next class in the biochemistry series, they don't actually remember the Krebs cycle because it didn't actually make sense to them. That's one example. And so what we aim for, what instructors aim for, what teaching is all about, is creating a lasting connection with knowledge. So taking the new knowledge and creating a way for students to embed it deeply within their understanding of the world. Okay, so let's take the real case I mentioned. And the takeaway message is that changing conceptual frameworks is really hard. So 2 studies were done. One of them, I'm showing the data, but this was done twice. It was done at Stanford one time and at the university, I'm forgetting now, another time. But it's been done twice with the very same results. So the prior knowledge at hand is that 94% of study participants believe that seasons are caused by an elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun. So the new knowledge and the correct knowledge is that the tilt of the Earth in orbit causes the seasons, because in truth, the orbit of the Earth around the sun is almost perfectly circular. Now, if you ask, do we have any astronomers in the room today? Okay, so an astronomer will say, okay, no, it's not exactly perfectly circular, but it is very, very close to perfectly circular. And so it was so common, this misconception, because textbooks, which are sometimes awful, and we're going to talk more about that, have drawings that look a lot like the one you see on the screen, where the Earth is going in this elliptical orbit, and it looks far away from the sun sometimes, and then sometimes, like in the second one down, it looks close to the sun. And so that makes a lot of sense, that distance from heat would change seasons. All right, so NASA, not just, professor at X institution, but NASA, the organization, made an instructional video. It was very, very, very high production quality, and they distributed it through K-12 education systems and said, use this as a tool to teach students that it is not the orbit shape, but it is the tilt of the Earth that causes seasons, meaning that the tilt of the Earth influences how well the sun's rays actually permeate into the atmosphere, and that it's the continental closeness to the sun and not the center of the Earth's closeness to the sun that is causing the seasons. Okay, so that's the backstory. And now the question is, when this video is shown to people, and the study was done with young students in K-12, it was done with college students, and it was also done with adults. What do you think happened?
They found similar results.
They found similar results, exactly. Children tend to learn a little better than adults and college students.
I was gonna predict that it took more effort, or that in the adult population you had less people like really learning or remembering this, because they have all this prior knowledge, and it's like when Pluto wasn't a planet anymore. Like, the people were complaining were the adults, because like, well, my whole knowledge and concept has been changed, and the kids are like, okay, whatever, just something new.
Exactly. And you know what? That's a perfect place to pause and say that for all intents and purposes, if you're teaching college students, you're teaching adults. You know, many of my colleagues will slip and call their students kids, because they do feel young. They feel very young, but they're not. They're adults. They've had life experiences. Some of them have their own kids. They've had jobs. They've learned a lot. And so to think about them as adults coming with fully formed concepts is really, really appropriate. And you're right. So the adults had a much harder time changing a conceptual framework. So the data I'm going to show you is on adults. So in this first case, 2% of the people who were shown the video integrated knowledge of tilt into their conceptual framework. And that amounts to, when they were tested afterwards, they gave a correct description of why seasons happen. And it was testing in writing, so they were asked to write a short essay, but also then an interview. So even if they didn't articulate it in an essay, they were given a chance to describe the seasons verbally. 98% had no conceptual change whatsoever, which means that they watched the video and it just didn't make sense to them, and it didn't change their knowledge structure. And this was, again, a very high production video. And then 75%, so notice 98 and 2% add up to 100. So this is the result of changing a conceptual framework. But it's worth noting that 75% changed their belief about the orbit. So the video told them that, okay, they reported, okay, it's a circular orbit, just like I told you, circular orbit. They'll remember that. They don't forget that. That's a new piece of information. But it's a piece of information that's on the edge, because if you think about it being circular, then it breaks down the reasons for the seasons. And so even though they'll tell you it's a circular orbit, they're very confused about then why the seasons change at all. So that's incomplete learning has happened. So conceptual change is hard. That's the title of this slide. And I want you to take that forward. Teaching is hard. Learning is very hard, especially for adults. And now is where I want to come back to this human aspect and the cultural aspect, because the belief systems, not just the knowledge that people have had or their experience throwing balls up and catching them, like physical knowledge of the world, but students' beliefs influence their learning. They influence students' motivation. They affect the student's selection of learning and studying strategies. So you can tell a student maybe the best mechanisms to study, but if they believe, because someone has told them to make flashcards and flash themselves or quiz themselves, or they believe concept mapping is the way to learn, that's what they will continue to do. And that may not be the most productive way to learn what you're teaching them. Students' beliefs affect how students evaluate their learning, and of course, vary by discipline and context. And here's a great quote. Most students, unlike experts or professors, maintain that their beliefs about knowledge consist of disconnected facts and formulas, and they're handed down by authority, and they're unrelated to their everyday life. And this is why students will often memorize a fact, spit it out on a test, but not actually be changed by the knowledge you want to give them. Okay, so let's think about a conceptual framework for understanding learning. So if we think about the pathway model of teaching to learning, because as we've already talked about, students create their own knowledge. You can't do that for them. But just as an architect makes a blueprint, you can design a space and materials for the students to learn. So, oh, and I see a question popped up in Zoom chat. Let me make sure that I'm catching them. So if learning happens by context or in context, it should be assessed in the same context. We're going to get there. That's a really, really great thought. There's a case study coming up that addresses just this question. And I will say that one powerful way of learning is if a student can learn a piece of knowledge and apply it to a different context, that is mastery of a very deep, deep level of learning. That means that they have a plastic understanding of a concept and what it means. But if we're talking about the context by which a student learns, so if you teach a student something by concept mapping and then you test them with an essay, that's a very different context of having to have them perform. So we're gonna continue that conversation, so hold on that. Omar wrote a question, plasticity of learning. And I think this question means that do people get to a point where they can't learn as well anymore? Is anybody familiar with the research on language acquisition? Okay, there's a body of research that shows that children age 0 to 8 pick up language much, much faster than 8 throughout life. That is evidence that there is plasticity in the brain for picking up new knowledge, especially language. And so that is the strongest body of evidence is the plasticity of language acquisition and really, I think any acquisition from age 0 to 8, and it gets harder for people to learn after that. But I will add in, I know of at least one person who thinks that the reason that young children can learn easier is because they're less inhibited. And so to learn language, you must be willing to make a lot of mistakes. One of the graduate students I know who teaches Spanish and Portuguese says that his classroom, it's almost like learning naked. You really have to leave your inhibitions at the door and be willing to make a lot of mistakes in front of your peers to learn language. And some people believe that young children just aren't inhibited. And so they're willing to make more mistakes and then they learn faster. Whereas adults are very inhibited and college students don't want to sound dumb or say the wrong answer. So there's mixed evidence on plasticity in learning. Most experts would say that language acquisition is much more plastic age 0 through 8. And adults absolutely bring biases to their knowledge, absolutely. So, and that's something to consider. That's really a learner-centered approach, and that's where we're headed now, is thinking about who your learner is, what are the biases they bring, what are their misconceptions, and what are their identities, and is your identity, how does that affect their learning? These are big considerations that, these were the considerations I hope that you took from Wilson's talk and bring to this discussion. Okay, I'm going to pause on answering those questions, but please make sure I do and I don't miss any of them. And we're going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so as we think of the pathway model of teaching to learning, it can be sort of summarized in some blocks of text. The first is that everyone has views about how the world works that are informed by context and experience, and they bring that prior knowledge to learning. New information challenges these views necessarily. And so people as you teach someone something new, they're constantly thinking about how it makes sense in context they know of. Consistent information which validates views is retained much more easily, and study after study shows this. But information that's not consistent, like the tilt of the Earth, the orbit system seemed consistent. The tilt of the Earth didn't seem as consistent to people. If information is not consistent, it requires the difference to be reconciled and explained. And that's often very hard for students to do unless they're given enough time or enough space to identify their own inconsistencies, because you can't do that for a lecture class for 300 students, is figure out every way in which new information is inconsistent. So during the reconciliation stage of learning, new neural networks form for students. And that's what creates that lasting knowledge. And that's what I tried to show in that sort of poor cartoon version, is really embedding new knowledge deeply within a conceptual framework for students. New neural networks lead to behavioral changes. We know that. So when So a student will behave differently, and for the purposes of learning, that would be they can take an exam, they can apply new knowledge to a new situation. Repetition, extended application, and assessment contribute to retention. So a student who learns something once and doesn't use that knowledge again, does not return to it, doesn't retain it. So retrieval practice, this idea of constant quizzing, or the thing I hated when I was in college, where material from the first 2 quizzes would show up on the 3rd and 4th quiz. I'm blanking on what it's called. That works really well. So students are, as they're studying new knowledge, they're being forced to remember the old knowledge. The more times they have to remember, recall, and apply, the better they learn that knowledge. Okay, so we can think of this as framework, dissonance of knowledge, construction of new knowledge, behavioral change, retention, better learning. And what this means, if you think about what these things mean, it means that we need to be thinking about learning before we think about teaching. It means that if we want teaching to work, we have to understand the system by which we're working on. Another analogy I really like is giving a TED Talk. So when I work with graduate students and postdocs at Yale who are starting to teach, they're very worried about being able to answer all the questions their students have. They're very worried about sounding like an authority. They're very worried about looking like an authority. They're very worried about their teaching. They're not thinking necessarily about their students. And what that means is that they're prepared to give a TED Talk. So they're prepared to walk into a room and deliver a polished, beautiful lecture. And they may have thought a lot about their slides or their animations, and their arrows twirl. Isn't that awesome? But they didn't think about their learners. And the analogy I bring is that teaching can happen without learning. A TED Talk can exist online and no one could watch it, right? Learning doesn't happen without teaching. So start with the action you want to occur, and then think about what you need to do to make that action occur. Okay, so that means that we take a student, we must, if you are thinking about the learner, you're taking a student-centered approach to learning. And if you take a student-centered approach and realize that people are building their own knowledge, you cannot put the knowledge into them, that means they need to be active. They need to be doing things that are building knowledge and not passive. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of classrooms look like this. Nod or shake your head. So a lot of classrooms look like this. A lot of classrooms look like a movie theater, and this student back here is leaning forward, possibly with his head on his chin or her head on her chin, paying attention, and that's wonderful. But this person is leaning way back. This person is probably watching World Cup. I did an instructional consultation last year, and I can't tell you how many people I saw watching soccer in a pre-med lecture on bioethics. And so there's a lot of things you can do in a passive situation that are not learning and are not productive. And you know what? Students are, college students are adults. That is their choice. But if we want to create spaces of optimal learning, we need to empower them and put the onus on the learner to learn. So what does that look like? Well, that might look like this. That might look like, smaller groups working together on projects, standing up and writing the wrong answer down and getting feedback from it. That may look a lot like this. So breaking up a class structure from looking down at one screen to looking at each other, voicing some ideas that are wrong or right and getting feedback about them. Because the teacher in an ideal world might be sitting with every group having a discussion-based class. But in science, as you often know, have been privy to, some rules of numbers dictate that we have these very large classes, 150. Well, you can still do, active learning. You can still have students being actively engaged. Some active learning might look like this. So even though there's some fixed seating problems, we have students turning to each other, thinking, analyzing something critically, and then probably being held accountable for what their thoughts are. Now, there's one thing I have to point out, and that's that in the next few slides, and in some of what I just did by showing you these images, I vilified the lecture. So you may get this takeaway message, lecture is bad. lecture is not bad. There's an important place for lecture. Some of it's economics, that we can't have seminar style classrooms for every biology class. There are not enough instructors. There are too many intro biology students. I understand that. There are university institutional limitations. Lecture's not bad. It's how a lecture is done, and it's the passivity versus the activity of the learner that you need to think about. So I've co-taught a large lecture course where every 20 minutes there was something the students had to do that woke them up. They couldn't remain passive through a moment. And so there are ways to do active learning in a lecture. What is bad is when students can sit down, feel like the material was beautiful and they get it, stand up and realize they had just been watching TV the whole time. They couldn't really, even remember the plot of the learning or the story or anything the professor just said. Okay, so active learning is not passive. It's anything that gets the students actively engaged, questioning, thinking about their prior knowledge and how the new knowledge fits. This could be a discussion. This could be group work, laboratory sections, experiments in class, project-based work, case studies, in-class example problems that they work individually or in small groups. Think, pair, share is a strategy where when you pose a question to a class and no one answers, it's like crickets chirping. You say, turn to your neighbor, discuss an idea, then come back and I'm going to ask for people to share. And when that happens, I turn to my neighbor and I say my crazy thing that I was embarrassed to say in front of the whole class. But then suddenly when I come back, I'm not embarrassed anymore because it's not just my idea. It's an idea I've already vetted. Or I can say, hey, this crazy person over here had an idea. Here's what it is. So think, pair, share can break down the boundaries of where people are comfortable to talk. Diagramming and concept mapping. Other active things students can do to try to connect information. And there's many, many more. The point is not the specific strategy, but what the student's doing, what the learner is doing that is active and not passive. Are there any questions? I'm going to look back on the chat menu. For scientists, I just read, sometimes for scientists it is hard to admit they don't know. Absolutely. It is absolutely hard for scientists to admit they don't know. And I find that somewhat appalling given that science is the exploration of new knowledge, and new knowledge are things we don't know. And so we should be glorifying in all the things we don't know. Of course, this is in the context of not wanting to sound like the one person who doesn't know when everybody else knows something. Of course, that's true. But I think that I know from evidence and from my own teaching that the way to break down walls of inhibitions for students is to model curiosity and sometimes to model not knowing, but model how to find out and how to doggedly find out answers. All too often, professors come across as perfect and as authoritative, and that's not the truth. Science isn't done by one brilliant person in a room. It's done by teams of people bouncing ideas off of each other and learning from each other. There's a wonderful paper that just came out this year called "Even Einstein Struggled," and I'll put the paper in our shared folder because the paper is about using stories about how hard Einstein struggled to learn things and to figure out his theory of relativity. And the stories were used in classrooms. So students who read these stories about how hard Einstein struggled did better in their science courses than students who read a similar passage about how brilliant Einstein was. So the message that brilliant people know brilliant things damages students wanting to learn and their motivation to learn. A message of scientists are curious people doggedly pursuing ideas. If you tell students that and you model that behavior for them, they learn more and are more motivated. So that's a recent paper that's really useful, and I'll drop it in. Susanna, is that the paper, Susanna? All right, someone put a link up. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about Freeman et al., the paper you read in preparation for this. And when I say let's, that means I want to stop talking for a little bit. And would someone like to say something they were surprised by? maybe summarize this data a little bit? Let's see.
Somebody's getting their notes. I see Omar has a question on the chat. Omar, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, would you, so the question is how,
you're cutting out. We can't really hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now, yes. No. Well, I'll go ahead and read it. Your connection seems to be a little flimsy. So Omar's question is how we can identify the best approach for teaching a scientific to young children, and an example he asks about is photosynthesis.
Right. So my answer to that question is scientific, and that is, if you wanted to do an experiment, you wouldn't derive all principles from sort of ground zero. You would go into the literature and see what some other people have done. Maybe find that other people had done the experiment, see what they did, and then think about how to improve upon it or ask the next question. And so in teaching, it's the very same way. I would think about how other people have taught. And that doesn't mean going to a textbook and teaching what a textbook, the way a textbook teaches, or using the textbook examples. I mean going online and finding the databases of lesson plans that real teachers use, and modifying, standing on the shoulders of giants, if you will, and using the resources available from other instructors. And so that's where I would start. So if you wanted to teach photosynthesis, I would go to a large database of teaching materials and search photosynthesis, pull out those and see which are on level with your learners. And that also implies you need to know your learners. You need to know what level they're at, what prior sort of botany, plant biology they've had, and then design a lesson going from there. The other answer is that teaching, a bit like science, is an iterative process. And what I mean by that is no one class or one lesson is sort of you, the teacher. It's an arc of relationships. And over the course of a year with young children, it's an arc of relationships and knowing who they are. In a semester for college students, it's still an arc of a 12-week relationship with people. And then when you get to do it again, you're more informed on what worked and what didn't. One of the very best things I did in my early teaching was to keep a teaching journal. And so when I taught the same course 3 years, that second and third year, I went back and said, okay, lesson number 3, what did I do that worked? What did I do that didn't work? So just like you keep a laboratory notebook, keep a teaching journal, and that will help you build the lessons to be most effective. Okay, does anyone want to have a stab on summarizing this data or even jumping into what you found really surprising? Okay. Go ahead.
I found surprising the failure rate for lecture type classes. It was like 55%. That is like really amazing for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I read that, I remember thinking that seemed very foreign to me, that I couldn't imagine in my experience. I was thinking intro bio, looking around and thinking half of these people are going to fail. I don't think that happened to me, but that is certainly what the data was. And we have to remember this was a meta study, thousands and thousands of students from different institutions. So failure represented not a C, but an F, or students dropping out of the course. Failure was considered anything where the student did not get credit for the course on their transcript, meaning they either dropped the major or had to take the class over again. That was the definition of failure. So one question is, Since it's a meta-analysis, did they discriminate by origin of university and college? No. So what's lumped into this are different institutions. And so one can imagine if you pulled apart your research institutions from your non-research institutions and sort of size, that the data might look a little bit different. But no, this was sort of a lump sum of what's going on in US institutions. All right, so takeaway message, you can look at either graph for the same takeaway message, and that's that less students fail with active learning versus lecture. Mm-hmm. Less students fail. I prefer the panel B, looking at the density plot, and in blue, what we have are the active learning students. On the x-axis are percent students who fail, and in yellow is a traditional lecture. And so certainly in traditional lecture, if you look over here, there are some students who don't fail at all. They do just fine. So we've got some at 0, but there's this huge distribution that is around this red line, which is 33.8%. So on average, 33.8% of students fail, in sort of this lecture density plot. Not on average, sorry, in the density plot, the midpoint of this density. But that shifts the mean change by 12, I think it's about 12% to 22 when you use active learning. So you're shifting more students into this area of not failing. Okay, so anything else on the data? So you have the paper if you want to revisit it. What did you think about this passage?
Sometimes what brings people away from science is that initial, experience, like as a freshman. So I think when they think about this whole thing about bringing more people to STEM, like how can they do it? Sometimes that initial experience can drive people away, right? And they have the skills and they have the passion of it, but maybe they just feel like, oh, this is too overwhelming, or too much for me. And maybe it had been a bit of a better exposure, or initial exposure would have guide somebody at least some related field of STEM. And I do that by firsthand experience too. I was in chemistry, and because of one of the chemistry classes, I shied away. I was like, this is not for me. This is a terrible class. I'll switch. But I stayed in science. But what about those that definitely leave?
That's right. There's some shocking data on the number of dollars spent on upper level laboratory courses. So what I mean are junior, senior level laboratory courses where they do really fun things, right? It's not your cookbook experiments. It's your clone new proteins, if you can express a new fluorescence, a new sort of length of fluorescence. It's your do some genomic analysis of something you find. There's a lot of money poured into upper level science courses and little money poured into intro courses. And there's a lot of evidence to show that that's the absolute wrong model, is to capture people early, let them do interesting things, let them see the creative process of science, let them be more active. Don't lecture intro bio, but let them dive in. And then it's the upper level students will likely be working in labs anyway, right? Pour the money into the intro level course, put all the resources in the intro level course. So that's one thing that I hope is happening. I think more and more, and I hope continues to happen. One thing I wanted to point out about this passage from the paper, again, you've got the paper to look over, is the ethical nature of this, that there are ethical implications. If this were a drug study, it would have been stopped and all students would have been given active learning opportunities. Because what this study showed is that there was an opportunity for 3,516 students to not fail, is what the data shows. And so if we think about serving our students in an ethical way, keeping an eye on the research and giving them the best opportunities to learn, I believe is an ethical consideration. It's a right consideration. It might feel right. I think it's also an ethical consideration when you think about their tuition dollars and how hard they're likely working to be where they are. Even if they're on a full ride, it doesn't mean it's free for them. Okay, I see a question on the Zoom window. Maybe I missed this. Is it possible that active learning leads to less failure because the assessments are very different? And if so, can it really be compared to lectures? The answer to this in most of the studies, the meta-analyses are hard because you don't often know exactly what tests are given and if they're standardized between cohorts. But for a lot of studies that aren't meta studies that are smaller scale, the assessments are the same. Assessments are the same. And so this really means that students doing something other than sitting watching has gains for learning. Okay. Lectures maybe more, surely more in order to have better outcomes instead. So in the interest of time, we're going to skip this data. The take-home message of this data is that active learning doesn't hurt. So the other thing one might think a bit ethically is, well, what about the students who do really well in lecture? If you do more activities in your class or more active learning, are you hurting some students? And the answer is no. They learn just as well. But what you are doing is creating more opportunities for students who would fail. So people are moved up the bell curve. They don't fall backwards. I cannot point at one paper that says active learning hurts any population of students. Okay, so if we return to this model, I want to point out again that in this model is inherently student-centered. We're talking about what students are doing to learn in the learning process. Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy is a really useful tool for instructors because it allows you to plan instruction and allows this rubric for you to look at questions you might ask of students or assessment tools you might ask. And it goes from this lower order thinking to higher order thinking skills. So it gives away a language for teachers to say, okay, I'm going to ask this question on an exam. Is it higher order thinking skills? Is it lower order thinking skills? Or to really think about their exams as a sum total or homeworks as a sum total. How much memorization do you want students to do? Just like lecture, there's a place for lecture, there's a place for memorization. Students sometimes just need to know what something is, the definition of something. And then they can build on that knowledge and know how to apply it in different contexts. And so you think, instructors should be thinking all the time about how much remembering students are doing, how much understanding they're doing. Are they being asked to apply knowledge, to analyze knowledge, to evaluate, or to create knowledge? Now, in the corner, you see a triangle that looks a lot like the historic food pyramid. Now, I blame the food pyramid for why I had to eat so many carbs when I was growing up in public school. I think you're younger than me. You're probably okay. I ate a lot of carbs because we had this outdated, awful food pyramid where bread was at the bottom. And so it meant that there was a lot of carbs in every meal and a little protein at the top. We know better now. And so I want to apply the same rule to the triangle. When Bloom published his taxonomy, he didn't put it in a triangle. Other people have done that. And it's not to imply that students need to do more remembering than they need to do evaluating or creating. If it's appropriate in your course, you should have them doing all evaluating and creating. But it's what's appropriate for your course. The reason it's in a triangle is less of the shape, so ignore the shape if you would, but think of it as a hierarchy. The students remember first, they understand first before they can analyze, evaluate, and create. So there is a hierarchy to Bloom's. He drew it like this as an arrow across, to lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. And that's how I'd like you to think about it. But this triangle is going to pop up just because it's a very common symbol. When you think of, if you Google Bloom's, they're all pretty much across the board going to come up as triangles. Okay, so what can we do with Bloom's? Well, we can think about individual questions. What is kinetic and potential energy? What is the law of conservation of energy? Which question do you think it is? Or which Bloom's level do you think it is? Anyone? Someone who hasn't spoken yet.
Just remember.
Yep, remember. Okay. If the falling object lands on a trampoline, calculate quantities of interest of the object at different points in time. Shout it out, someone.
I would say it's more
Apply.
like apply or analyze. Yeah.
Apply or analyze. Absolutely. And I never get nitty picky about is it apply or is it analyze? It doesn't matter. Is it lower? Is it higher? Is it in the middle? Is it a mix of both? Okay, last practice one. Design a frictionless roller coaster ride with speeds and accelerations safe for passengers.
Create.
Absolutely. Okay, you guys are great at this. So now I asked you to bring an exam or homework. Get it out, please. Pick the question you found most difficult. So just pick one question and decide which Bloom's level it is. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, maybe just one. Okay, a few more seconds. Oprah does say it's okay to love bread. I love bread too. I just ate a lot of it. Oops. Okay, now this might be a bit tricky to do. Let's try it. How many people rated their question that you're analyzing, just pick one, as a Bloom's Level 1 remember question? To signal, raise your hand in the chat.
Okay, so far it's 0.
Okay. How many people picked 2? So that would be Bloom's Level understand.
2 people so far. 3. No? 3.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna lower all the hands. All right.
Okay. And how many people said 3? Apply?
We have 4 so far. And Adeline is level 3 or 4.
Okay.
So 5.
Okay. And how many people said 4?
Okay, the ones that had their hands raised before, lower them if you don't want them counted. Okay, 4 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
All right. And 5?
All right, lower your hands, those that didn't have 5. So we have 4 students with level 5.
Okay. And
Naisha, so 5 students, sorry.
And finally, level 6, please.
All right. All right. We have 4 students.
And thank you, Liz, a bell curve. Excellent. Okay, I asked you to pick your hardest question, the question that's usually very hard for students. And I think that this doesn't surprise me, as we got a bell curve centered around, oh, I need to share.
Oh, we're seeing your presentation right now.
Okay, so did you see it flip slides now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have a bell curve centered higher in that higher order thinking, because these are hard questions for students. Now, what do you think This is a really interesting question. What % of higher order Bloom's Law questions do you expect to find on a typical intro bio exam? In the interest of time, I'm not going to take answers and just show you the answer. Is that AP biology is most skewed towards those hard questions, but by and large, questions are centered around remember and understand, these lower order thinking skills for intro bio. And the study was replicated at Yale. And interestingly, the data I'm not showing is if you ask Yale professors what order of questions their exams are, they will say that they're 75% higher order thinking skills and 25% remembering. But if you actually score what they are, they're very highly skewed towards remember, understand, and very lowly ordered towards create, evaluate, and apply. And as I said, remembering is appropriate. I'm not going to say that it's bad, but if we're asking students to construct their own knowledge, we need to give them questions to prompt that kind of construction. And those kind of questions are evaluate, create questions. Okay, so if you dive deeper into the scientific teaching book, you read chapter 1, there are the book talks about learning cycles. And what these learning cycles are is modeling Bloom's, starting with engaging and going to evaluate. So asking students to start with just engage somewhere, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. There are different learning cycles. They're very much different flavors of the same thing. Ask students to start low and build to higher order thinking skills. And then think about the appropriate ratio for your students in your class on how much higher order thinking skills and how much lower thinking skills. Okay, we, in the interest of time, are going to do backwards design a little bit quickly. The good news is that it's a very simple concept that is also very powerful. If you take nothing else away from my section of the talk, I want you to remember that Corey Kuchera at Yale thinks that backwards design is a way of life. I backwards design Thanksgiving meals. I backwards design family vacations. I use it everywhere, and so it's a very simple thing. We're going to skip the case study, which is actually a very interesting case study that I said in the very beginning. There was a question about alignment. I don't think the person, I'm very sorry, I forgot whose name it was that asked the question, but they were asking about context. So teaching something in a context and then having sort of the answer in a different context. And that's about alignment. So if you teach someone with multiple choice quizzes, but then you give them an exam on essay writing, they're probably going to fail the exam because they didn't practice writing about science in prose. They practice multiple choice questions. Similarly, if they concept mapped all through the class and then their final exam is to solve mathematical problems, they're probably going to fail. So it's about aligning things. And so this case study is really asking you to think about why alignment is important to students. Specifically, the student learns about the lac-operon, but doesn't know in the final exam how to describe a strategy bacteria use to regulate gene expression. Okay. So, and this slide is sort of introducing the weightiness of, so you've just earned a professorship. You know, you've been named an assistant professor at a college, and you're teaching a new course. And what are you going to do to teach the new course? Okay, I offer backwards design as a strategy in context to a traditional strategy. And a traditional strategy, if I pull any Yale professor, any professor I know around here, they have a similar strategy, and that is they start with a textbook. They'll choose a textbook. They'll create a syllabus, and that's really picking out the chapters and matching them up with dates of the calendar year. They'll write lectures, notes, and prepare slides, largely using pictures they get out of the textbook or pictures they pull online. And then they'll write homework or exams questions. They'll go back through their notes, through their slides, pick out key concepts, and write an exam. Okay, there are ways to do this well. This is a traditional course design method, but I offer you backward design, a much more efficient, student-centered way to do this. And that also naturally builds alignment. And that is to formulate broad learning goals. And then to set specific learning objectives. And it's not important for you to clearly be able to define the difference between learning goals and learning objectives. Learning goals are what you want your students to have thought about. learning objectives are what you want your students to be able to do. So I started my entire talk telling you what my learning objectives are for you, the things that I want the people in this space to be able to do after the session. So start there. How do you want students, people to be changed by what you're doing? Then you design assessments. Then you design how you're going to know whether they got there or not. And then you prepare the learning activities. So it's flipping the order of how you think about teaching. You're thinking about the student first. We built that background talking about constructivism. Then you're thinking about how you'll detect changed behavior. And then you're thinking about what students have to actually practice in order to get there. And the big takeaway is that a traditional method is teacher-centered and teaching-centered, and backwards design is student-centered. Where do you want the students to end up? Now, one consequence of this, if we discussed it and really fleshed it out, is you might not teach every chapter in the book. I'm not a big fan of textbooks anyway. I think they represent a canon that is not necessarily culturally representative or represents all knowledge in all fields. And I much prefer teaching strategies that start with what students need to know or be able to do, and then builds back to the knowledge they need to be able to do those things. In our data-driven age, students can find all of the textbooks that they want, so you don't need to teach from a textbook anymore. Okay, so thought about a different way, and this is really, if the previous picture didn't give you the backwards momentum of this, I hope this visual does. What do students need to know or be able to do by the end of the course? You start by thinking about the end, and those are your learning objectives. How will you know if they get there? Those are your assessments, your quizzes, your exams, your papers. And what will the students do to get them there? So then it's the PowerPoints, then it's the in-class activities. Those are your learning activities. Okay, and that brings us to the most important part, which is I would be a hypocrite if I didn't ask you to actively think about these things, right? I don't want to do that today. And so I'd like to think about how you can apply what you've learned about inclusive teaching, active learning, and backwards design, which again is alignment of assessment and activities with your learning objectives, thinking about the end goal first. So here is our practice. At this point, we are at 4 o'clock. I would like you to take 10 minutes only to break into your small groups. And that needs to be a hard, fast timeline. And you have a little bit of work to do, but I know you can get it done in 10 minutes. And in groups of 3 people, I want you to pick one of the questions that you brought, and it's one of those the questions you just thought about the Bloom level, and design an activity, a quick one. What will students do? What do they need to do to be able to answer that? And then use multicultural strategies to ensure that all learners are included in that activity. When you come back to the big group, I'd really like all groups to very briefly present, under a minute, a sentence or 2, answering these questions. And these questions, the framework that will help you, are also in this collaborative document. So you can feel free to work from this document. It has the very same directions I had on the PowerPoint. So here are your directions. If you want to, capture these notes, it can be a shared resource at the end of this session. But please take 10 minutes now in groups of 3 to think about combining all of the knowledge that you've learned in Wilson's session and in this session.
It's on view only. Just saying.
I'll change it right now. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, well, Corey's changing it. Everybody's ready to go into their breakout rooms? All right,
Yeah.
You're gonna have 10 minutes, so you're gonna come back at 4:05. See you all soon. Okay, they're all in the breakout rooms now.
You're muted, Corey.
Oh, sorry. So they can't hear us. Time is a little bit tight, but we'll end at 4:30.
Okay. I think we reserve their time until 5, so.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's great news. That's really great news. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Because I hate rushing people after what?
So what were you saying, Corey?
I
hate rushing people?
hate rushing people who have invested time in something and
Yeah.
have been told they're gonna have time. So that's great. We will.
Yeah, we blocked their time until 5.
Okay.
Yeah, there may be some drop off. I know I think Liz said that she probably had to leave by 4 because she's at work right now. But yeah.
Well, that's okay. For those who stick around, they'll get a little bit of feedback, and that's nice, or some accountability anyway.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, I have my camera off. My computer's really slow, and so if I have the camera off, it makes it a little bit better.
Any feedback for me in the moment? Things you're thinking about?
No, I think one of the students, one of the reasons I mentioned the importance of taking it, like I reiterated the importance of taking into account that some students process information differently, and the colors and the presentations, because one of our students said, I feel like I want to participate, but I can't because it takes me longer to kind of get through, and when I feel like I'm ready to share, they've already moved on. So I think for next year we need to maybe think about that more intentionally, because I do feel like we're going pretty quickly. It's a lot of material, but I think it's good. I'm learning a lot. I've never heard of this. What is it? The Bloom thing?
Bloom's taxonomy.
Yes, taxonomy. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's I think for new or novice teachers, it's sort of like, oh, okay, there's this thing that exists. But what I've seen over and over again is then when those people start teaching, suddenly they say, oh God, what was that thing? I need it so badly now, because it does provide the sort of checks and balances way to think about teaching materials.
Okay, so people who are teaching, they use it, they kind of refer back to it constantly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because people will write an exam or a quiz and think this is great, and then if they actually pay attention to each question and what it's testing, they realize this is not what I want it to test at all.
I see.
And I've seen it.
Reference.
What's a recommended ratio? Because obviously you do need some type of background knowledge for some, you want to make sure they have some background knowledge. So there should be some understand and remember questions before you can feel that they're ready to do more advanced levels.
Yeah, I truly think the ratio should be aligned with the course goals and objectives. And so it is, an intro class is going to have a very different ratio than an upper level class, where if the objective is for students to be able to understand a concept across many different disciplines, for instance, then higher order thinking skills, having more of those is really appropriate. I think that the point is that it can't all be remember or understand, or students will never have the chance to construct deeper understandings of the pure knowledge.
Mm-hmm. So how long are we giving them?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
4:01. It's until 4:05.
Okay. I wasn't keeping track like of when we started the time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to double check.
So given how fast they're filling out the table, and that we can go until 5 o'clock, although I don't want or necessarily think we need to go. Is there something you two wanted to do after I was done?
No, not really.
Okay. One thing I'll be very curious about, and I'd really like your feedback, is what I tried to do with this is tie Wilson's material back in or give people a chance to synthesize them together, whether that worked or not, or if it still feels like two different people talking about two different things.
Yeah, I think maybe for next year we might think of maybe Wilson could shorten a little bit some of the example sections and apply it more to the classroom setting, because I think that's what that was missing a little bit.
Yeah, I think I would next year. I would shorten some of the discussion questions he had, and then use what he talked about to then bring it to some of the exercises in the context of teaching in the classroom. Like, you know, we talked about multicultural education. So, you know, how does that look in the classroom? Let's do an exercise where we're actively taking that into consideration, as well as what you're saying about scientific teaching and, you know, what works and what doesn't. Like, how do you bring those together? How do you bridge those? I think it'd be great to have exercise with that kind of, because I think that ties it up nicely in a concrete way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing that I think was missing a little bit is, you know, they were placed into situations where they were thinking where they had experience maybe prejudiced against them. But I think it's also very healthy to think about how they might have at some point harbored some of those prejudices or stereotypes. You know, I think that's very revelatory sometimes when we put ourselves in that position.
Absolutely. That's why I started with white, like my identities, almost wanting them to having thought very critically about biases. You know, here's a new person. Here's a new person that you don't know. Mm-hmm. You're going to be forced to look at them for a while. What are you thinking about? But one way into this conversation that's been really rich in my work is about identities and power. So, what are the identities that instructors bring to the classroom? What are the identities students bring? Thinking about those as plastic, they're not fixed. Students' identities in the classroom are very different from their identities in their dorm room.
People have different identities, so you can bring multiple ones at once into a room.
And to me, inclusive teaching is making space for multiple identities.
Yeah.
Students bring all of their identities, but to feel safe,
mm-hmm.
they can bring as many as they want into a space.
Absolutely.
But I think the power dynamics can't be ignored. And that's one of the most uncomfortable things for new teachers is the mantle of power, making fundamental decisions about people's future. I mean, failing students is awful. No one wants to do it. And then but that's not the only way power manifests itself. Facing that is really is a difficult challenge and takes some time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you kind of saw that from some of their comments, like when Wilson was discussing the microaggressions and examples of discrimination and the different isms in the media. Like some of them were saying, like, "Oh my God!" Like I was not. Somebody said, like, I wasn't aware of all of these. So it really takes, like, you need to be woke. It's not obvious because the way you see things is framed by your own experiences, and so it's not something that just comes naturally to people, but you have to be intentional.
And also by the norm, if it's presented always like that, if you've seen Snow White and
right,
a children's classic, then you're never going to question.
Yeah, it's just the way it is, right? Yeah,
it's presented. All right, so it's been 10 minutes. There's 8 breakout groups. It seems like 7 of them have typed in most of the table, or 6 of them.
Yeah, I made the table not because I really want them to be accountable for the ideas, but to give a little bit of gravity to actually answering that, there's some accountability. And it's modeling group work. Group work is often successful because there's accountability to other people.
Yeah.
And so I'd like them to think of this folder as shared documents that they made together and they can see for future use if they want. That would be the best outcome of this.
Yeah. So let me know when you think we should pull them back in.
Let's give them 3 more minutes.
Okay.
That would be 5 minutes extra.
All right. They don't just use the typical animals. That's what I like. It's like a narwhal, a cormorant. I don't even know what a cormorant is. I guess it's a bird.
Kraken? Or,
Kraken?
yeah, like the big.
That's like a giant squid.
Right. Yeah, they have a lot of those too.
Monica, thank you for making these groups work so quickly and easily. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, Vanna. She's the one that set them up. Yeah, it's pretty easy to do them right away, especially if you don't need them to go back to the same group in multiple breakouts.
Although I think, if I remember correctly, if you redo the breakouts, it asks you if you want them to go into the same room. So it's even easier, yeah.
Yes. Pretty marvelous.
In group 7, is this person's name Raura, or is that a type?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Raura.
Laura. Okay.
Raura. Like Laura, but with an R.
No, Rora.
Right, like Laura.
Okay, yeah, I guess in English and in Spanish, the U is.
Well, in Spanish too. Like Laura. It's like Laura with an R instead of an L.
Right. But we say Laura, and in English you say Laura.
Right. Yeah, I guess so.
That's just beautiful. I love it. Also, I hardly ever see AUR, which is in my name, and is.
Oh, yeah.
So do they know each other by name fairly well by now, or are they still getting to know each other?
No, they know each other pretty well.
Okay, so if I say their names, it's just going to be me butchering some names and making people feel bad. So I might just call the groups by number then.
Okay, yeah. Whatever you're most comfortable with.
Yeah, well, at this, if I were going to see them again, I would learn their names. But we're a little late in the session for me to be.
Yeah. Well, and can't, like, if you wanted to do that, then you'd be spending, half a minute or so being like, wait, I guess say that again? Some of them are not.
Yeah, so I think for when they come back, I don't want to have this open unless they want to share their own screen. Does that make sense? I'd rather it be people talking to people. And what do you think?
Oh, you don't want them to read from the document?
She doesn't want it shared on the screen. So they can read from the document from their own screens. She doesn't want to have this on the screen.
Yeah.
She wants to have their faces.
Sounds good.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
let's bring them, group 8. All right, let's bring them back in group 8. We just won't start with group 8. They can keep typing if they need to.
I like your henna, Corey.
At one point as I was gesturing, I realized this might be so distracting to people.
No, it's pretty.
But thank you. I went to a multicultural fair, and my daughter was getting, sorry, everybody joining, I'm describing my henna. I was at a multicultural fair, and of course my daughter, who's 5, had to get a henna tattoo. And then I had to get one too, so they matched.
All right, everybody, remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking.
All right, is most everybody back now?
Yep, they're all back.
Okay. Everybody, thank you very much for the hard work I know you just did, and it was fast work. I watched the table populate. So first of all, I really want to thank you for that, for jumping right in. I know it's been a really long session, and you could have been very passive at some points during the session, so to come back and bring that activity enthusiasm means a lot. So thank you for that. And I would like to start out randomly with group number 3 and ask that some groups had more than 3 people. So my only ask is that to the degree possible, if you've already assigned a spokesperson, that everybody talk.
Okay. Well, can everybody hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, what we're planning to do is that what is the process of osmosis? That's the activity, that's the exam or question, that is the broader goal, that is the larger goal, meaning that that's what the students should know for the test. And we're gonna do an activity so the students remember, understand, apply, and create in that same activity. So we're gonna have at least 3 or 4 objectives for that. So students will, for the learning objective, the broader goal will be understand and follow a protocol of osmosis. And the objectives for the lessons will be exactly each step of the process. So if the lesson is divided in 3 days, maybe, the students will learn 1 step each day. So that will be each objective. So students then will analyze the results of the osmosis experiments. For the activity, students will be divided by groups. And then for the inclusive elements, we're going to use a demonstration, so students learn by modeling. And we'll follow the steps of the process. Yep.
Could someone else in your group talk about the inclusive?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that so we sort of, if to the degree possible, follow the person 1, person 2, person 3. So different people have a voice.
Lester?
That's the person 3, right? Wait, let me. Yeah, in the inclusive elements, the teacher will demonstrate the process of osmosis, and then the students will explain the processes and will receive feedback of other students or groups.
We were also thinking that we should take into consideration the different learning processes or ways. So that's why we wanted to have like the teacher or someone who will show, or something that could be visual, could be the teacher or a video or something, so that they can have an idea of what they're going to do, and then divide them in groups, and they will have the written protocol, and by themselves or groups will do follow the protocol. And at the end, when they when they give the oral talk, then also we want the entire group to give feedback. so that they can share, for example, if they got different results, why that happened, if it was the same protocol, why they got different results, and if something went wrong, what alternatives they can give, and more like a discussion dynamic.
One thing I might add is sometimes structure can go a long way. So assigning person 1, person 2, person 3, peek behind the curtain was a structured way to make sure that everybody's involved. And then I said to the degree possible. So if someone really doesn't want to be involved, then they can remove themselves. But if they want to be involved, there's an assignment for them, and it's different than everybody else's assignment. Great. Is group 3 done? Thank you very much. Let's go to group 5.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Yes. Also, our question was, what materials are more suitable for protecting an egg from a free fall? So our broader concepts for that is that to understand free falling gravity concepts, which is a physics concept, but also has some relationship with anatomy and physiology in terms of the brain and protection, and also the aerodynamics concepts. The Bloom's taxonomy is both remembering, analyzing, and creating a model using recyclable materials for protecting an egg, and then conducting an experiment by throwing that egg from a 10-meter fall. And for doing that, we had some criteria for those materials, which have to be non-flammable, and they have to be economic, light materials, and it has to be in a certain dimensions. For that activity designs, we
Omar?
Omar, you're cutting out, and maybe we can
the assessment is going to be, I'm sorry. Yes, could you hear me? Yeah.
You were cutting out a little bit, and I think maybe it's a good segue for somebody else from the group to continue the table.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay. See, Raura or is available, or
Raura or Rosa, I don't know if you can.
Or Rosa. I don't know if you can.
So Omar, where did you finish off? I'm a little bit lost here.
Yeah, I finished maybe on the, we have the specific learning, which is to protect the egg from free fall. And how we're gonna.
Yeah, we thought that the way we could assess the learning was to have them do an activity where they encase the eggs in different materials and throw them, and determine which material would be better, would protect the egg more, and would make it fall faster. And for the importance of, for the inclusive elements, we thought that with this activity, they'll need to keep in mind different materials that can be used in different settings, work in diverse teams, and learn how to listen and respect the opinions of other classmates. I think that's all we had for our activity.
Thank you so much. There's some pedagogical advantage to creating a competition, but you have to do it carefully. When it's a competition, to really sort of, as a group, figure out the best material, it can be really exciting to sort of put your material up against other people's material, or your ideas up against other people's materials. And that can create a really neat social dynamic where learning happens because you just are really excited about the competition, because it is a shared goal. Now, sometimes competitions can turn off learning when they really become about some person's idea being better than other people's ideas. But what you just described to me sounds like it would be really super engaging. So Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing and sort of passing the torch so that we can section these off and hear from everybody. Would group number 2 be willing to go now?
So that is Gladys,
Hi.
Hector.
Yeah. Okay, so we discussed a question that I guess you guys can see. It was a question provided by Hector. He had this question in a previous exam. So it is, according to the 1,000 genome data, what is the relationship between evolutionary conservation, functional impact, and allele frequency for genetic variants? In terms of the taxonomy, we consider that 3 main aspects are related or will be involved during the process of answering this question during the exam, which will be remember facts that you may have studied and will inform your statement. Then you need to analyze all those components and see how they relate to each other. And ultimately, you need to create and come up with your own ideas and statement and support it through the exam. Then, I don't know if the others want to talk. Hector or Gladys, before I continue.
Yes.
We're in the learning objectives.
Yeah, the learning objective is to critically understand aspects of the genome and evolutionary evolution of the human genome. In terms of active learning, yeah, this was a very traditional course, like, reading and hearing the professor. But basically, yeah, just discussing reference papers and reading. However, this class actually was only 2 students in the class. So yeah, the interaction was a little limited, but yeah, reading and discussing was basically. And in terms of inclusive elements,
well, I wrote down, I wasn't in that class, just based off, sorry for interrupting, but I write down, I'm just jumping in because it's not necessarily what happened in his course. I'm just like, if I was a professor, and even more as Hector highlight that it's a small group, and I didn't know that it was that small to student, but let's say that you have, I don't know, 5 to 10 students. And even though that these questions should be answered individually during it's a test question, before the exam, you could do 2 things. For example, to encourage constantly that your students meet up outside the classrooms and discuss. Some people like studying in groups, some others not, but just to encourage in general to share their ideas with the other class members. So maybe they say, I didn't think about it. And also another way, I'm very pro debates. I love that in the classroom because it provides a way in which students will be obliged or forced to prepare themselves and read papers way before the exam has to happen. And then when the test comes, they may remember more easily all these facts that they read at some point in preparation to the debate, and consequently also helpful to answer the test.
Does Gladys have anything to add?
I know. I really don't understand a lot about genomes, but I thought that maybe group discussion. I didn't know that it was a small group, but I really like when teachers or professors put people in little group discussion and later they share their ideas. Sometimes they have a really different idea about a topic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Discussion provides that space for students to commit to ideas, much like the debate. If I say something I only half believe, as I say it, I realize that I may only half believe it. And then someone else has the opportunity to tell me what they think, and I understand it better. And then I can say, oh, you're right. what I said didn't make much sense because of this piece of information. And so just creating space for discussions is wonderful. It's often easy to do in those small groups. It's a challenge, save the class where 20 people, not 2, or 200 people. It's a challenge to think about how to create the same discussion space. But on behalf of students, I think instructors need to try to do that for them. I'll bring up one thing about debates to be careful with, and I think they're wonderful too, is that some students need more time to respond comfortably to an answer. And so as prepared as you come to a debate, if someone throws, an idea out of left field and you are feeling very insecure about the time it takes to answer, that can shut off learning or sort of make someone feel like they're not as good at it, when it's not how much they know, it's just the processing of putting it into the right words in a short amount of time. But otherwise, an excellent, excellent teaching tool, an active learning tool. Thank you so much.
Can I contribute something following with that? Following that concern that not every student would like to be on stage, let's say, and or maybe, as you said, they process in a different time. I really like when I was in freshman year, I was taking this course on literature and Spanish, etc. And one of the requirements was debate, and it was a very big, so she divided in 2 different topics of debate. Therefore, you had 4 groups, 2 pros and 2 cons, each one with their own. But not everybody was required to stand up and do the arguments, but everybody was required to contribute and make sure that everybody read and create some sort of arguments. And later, whomever will express it, it's maybe 2 or 3 students from the 10 people group, but everybody passed through the process of reading and creating at least minimum 1 or 2 arguments. In that way, maybe it's students that are more shy or more introverted. Anyway, they pass through the process of getting the knowledge without having to be on stage, let's say.
Thank you so much for saying that, because it's often not the strategy you pick to do, but it's how you do it. Mm-hmm. It's creating structure that's clearly communicated, and doing it. It's the process is important. Doing something well is important. More important than which kind of activity is done is doing it so everyone has a role. The roles are defined. Everyone feels that they had enough time to prepare for their role. That is where you can have the most impact. And I think that's a very generalizable, transferable skill right there. So thank you so much for adding that. Okay, group 4, let's go next.
Hi, just to summarize, the question I have is, are platelet cells? And that is the question that underlies my thesis. Brief background, platelets are small pieces of the bigger cells, so they themselves do not have nuclei. But there's evidence that they do things that cells that do have nucleus do. So are they cells or not? So we were just chatting, and it came up the idea of a debate type of thing, where you have 2 different groups providing ideas of, evidence that there is for platelets being cells or not. And I know Myrene and Leslie were in my group, so they can talk about the other 2. Myrene, the Bloom taxonomy?
Yes, the taxonomy levels are 5, 4, and 6 because of the activities that the students must perform to develop or create their own theory based on correct evidence and experiments, etc.
And Leslie?
Yes, we were thinking of the idea about making a debate because we believe students are forced to become more flexible about their thoughts, while at the same time they become able to assess and conceptualize even better previous knowledge and accommodate this new information. And by this activity, I believe they will need to prepare and go through basic skills in science. They have to do research, and they have to go through the scientific method in order to answer some questions. And I believe that we can make that gap, that cultural gap about people who are a little slower answering questions, by positive reinforcement. I believe that what is important about this is the process and that people to become able to share their experience and to share their ideas. And it's more about the process than if you're right or wrong. And in the way we become more able to reinforce only participation and the process of it, I believe there will be less stress about making right statements or anything else.
Yep. There's no answer to that question, actually, and that's what I'm debating in my thesis. So it's the process what counts.
And that's great, not having an answer. It's great because at the end, you will have more about that process than anything else.
Thanks, girls.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to bring up one thing you said, and you said it way, I think, more eloquently than I will, but I sort of want to underpin it, is about scaffolding. So some of you may have heard this term before. It's definitely an educator term, and it really means, when you think about knowledge, that people have to understand a common vocabulary before you can ask the higher order thinking skills. So it's moving up blooms is really scaffolding. You can't start out with create a new system or create a new understanding before they have tools to do it. So scaffolding knowledge often helps people with less preparedness for a class. If you carefully scaffold, you bring everyone up to where they need to know to learn together. But emotional scaffolding is important too. And I'm stealing scaffolding from the knowledge domain and putting it into an emotion domain, because if you started, day one of class with this kind of debate, people might offend each other or hurt each other's feelings or try to outcompete each other. But if your class knows each other as a learning community, if they've built rapport, they know each other's names, then you can have these really rich debates where people have to defend something they don't necessarily believe, but that's okay, because they're more than the sum of what's coming out of their mouth to the people around them. They're known as people. And so bringing humanity into the classroom, letting your students build a rapport with each other, prepares them to do this active learning in much richer ways than if you didn't have that kind of emotional scaffolding, the comfort level in the class. Again, you said it better than I did with a real example, but I just wanted to say how important it is to have students build rapport. Okay, thank you so much. Let's skip to group number 6, please.
Our group is based on an experience of Soat, which is one of our group members. And her teaching experience is teaching science to non-scientific majors. So one of the main objectives of her course of class is to them to be able to discern between a good hypothesis and a bad hypothesis or incomplete hypothesis. And that falls in the category of understanding in the Bloom taxonomy level. Maybe will Marian so I can explain or talk a little bit more about the activity design part?
So I had to leave. I don't know if she's left already, but.
Okay. Oh, so I left. Oh yeah, she needed to. Okay, so
she had a class.
I could talk. So so basically, what we wanted to know what we wanted is that they could differentiate between what is a good hypothesis, what is an incomplete one. So then they will prepare like a different experiments following a protocol, and then evaluate if there was something missing from their hypothesis, they could improve it or not, or what was the end of the results. So yeah, basically it's more like a divided in small groups, like team-based learning.
And also, since these are non-scientific major students, one way that they can be, like the activity can be inclusive is to do experiments or little experiments on a wide array of topics, not focusing on botany or zoology, because maybe it doesn't fall in their interest and they will be discouraged and non-motivated. So maybe have variety in the type of topic that you experiment on. But at the end, it's the same objective. They will discern between a good hypothesis or an incomplete one anyway, or anyhow.
Yeah, and also if they, as she said, that they are like non-STEM majors, they could have different point of view of uh, how to approach to what is a good hypothesis from different perspective.
Absolutely. And what a phenomenal way to respect fields outside of science while teaching science, is to say that the method can be applied on what you care about, and let students use that as the material to learn the method, but to apply it to where they are and reach students where they are. I think that's incredibly inclusive. Really well done. Thank you. And let's see, group number 1.
Okay, hi. So our question was provided by Anna, and it's a question that I think we can work as an activity, but probably the activity could be used to prepare them for an exam question. So the question was to determine the mean electrical axis from the following EKG, and we provide an image of an EKG, and what does it imply about the condition. And the learning objective, which where we started from to design the activity, was that the students will be able to learn how to read any given EKG that can vary, and they can apply the concepts that they learn given on an exam question and that kind of image. And they can understand that the variations in the image, what does it imply about the system or the condition of the patient, of the person. And then from there, we decided to create an active learning strategy to divide them in groups, to discuss some of the activity, these variations, and and I think Carlos can take the next question. I don't know if Carlos left. No.
Yeah, no, it's
okay.
Anna, you're gonna talk about the learning objective?
Yeah, about the active learning. So, as Ariel said, we wanted the students to have a general knowledge of how a normal EKG looks and what some changes in the EKG mean. So we decided to do, as an active learning activity, make the students draw an EKG, because being able to actually, write stuff down makes you makes the learning process a little bit easier. We also wanted to divide the class in groups and give each group part of that EKG, and each group had to explain that part of the EKG and explain also what changes in those parts imply for that situation. And then the inclusive elements we think that are part of that active learning are, that's what Carlos is going to explain.
Yes, to make it inclusive, we're gonna divide the student groups, and then we are gonna use examples that are relevant to the community that we are teaching. For example, in our Hispanic community, we're gonna use as an example to design EKGs for myocardial infarction or heart failure. And that's it.
Would you clarify for me why dividing by community? Is it a relationship to a disease or a predisposition?
No. We divide the group by number, but the sample that we're gonna ask them to draw for the EKG is gonna be for disease that are relevant for the community. Because, for example, perhaps you use a disease that is not relevant, that they don't know anyone that have, they don't want to care that much about why is this relevant for us. But if you use a disease that they have family members, that are more probably that they have family members or know people that have that disease, they're going to feel more, connected, and they're going to be more interested in learning.
Absolutely right. Another thing to do a little carefully, I did when I was first teaching, I was less sensitive than I wanted to be, and I was talking about breast cancer with my students, and we had studied the biology of breast cancer, and we had read some primary literature, and then I wanted to make the discussion section real. And so I said, what would you do if your family member had breast cancer and they wanted to make the choice of chemotherapy or not, or sorry, breast removal or not? And we were going around the room, and then one student started to cry, and she said, "This happened last year." And I said, "Oh God, I didn't, and I didn't ask, did this happen to anyone?" That would have been really bad had I tried to ask people to self-identify. Don't do that. But I put someone in a space that made her uncomfortable. And it turned out okay. Nobody was offended, and our discussion was still rich, but I marked for myself to be a little bit more careful before throwing out issues that could bring up very emotional vulnerability. My class was, again, emotionally scaffolded, where she didn't feel embarrassed to cry a little bit in front of the classmates, but had I pushed someone's buttons by talking about something that happened to their parents or something health related early and made someone cry in front of their peers, that could have created tension. But thank you. This was not a negative comment about your strategy and your design. I think it's absolutely excellent. It was an opportunity to throw in a little bit of my experience.
I always ask. But
Sorry, group number 5, please. Is group number 5 ready to go?
Yes, I will explain the experiment. It's a laboratory activity. The student, we give them a hypothetical situation where students have to assign 3 treatments to plants, plants, and then they have to identify or evaluate what is happening to each tube, like identify which type of solution or the movement of water from cell to cell. And let's see if it's isotonic, hypertonic, hypotonic. That's for first year students in their first biology class. And I think Jarimar was going to explain the Bloom part. Jarimar.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mute my button. So we decided that if we're gonna ask this question in a later exam, that we will ask kind of a lower level, like understand, reminder Bloom in the category of Blooms. For example, what is identify different kinds. However, the activity or the active learning activity in the lab work will be more in application. So we will use apply and evaluate as one of the higher taxonomies. And I think that's it for me, right? Well, I can keep talking on the objective. So we determined that the learning objective of that activity is kind of the higher concept behind it, which is students will be able to explain different types of solutions and understand diffusion and osmosis. And they will do that in a laboratory settings where they are 4 people in groups, and they will be divided in different jobs. They have different jobs assigned. Melissa, do you want to add something about the laboratory activity or how it is assigned?
I'm not sure if I think Melissa had to leave.
Okay, if not, I can just go ahead and discuss the inclusion, how will be more inclusive. So I think in the group work activity, the laboratory work, it's important to have active collaboration and respect. It's an opportunity to get to know your teammates, and also an opportunity kind of to negotiate and discuss what kind of jobs you want to do, and then you can be mindful. Okay, so I'm a very good visual person, and I can do this. If I can work with something with my hands, I understand better. Kind of like that thinking, you can negotiate and have that, so they can discuss the assignment of jobs based on their preferred learning style. Another way is being mindful of their learning needs. So if there's someone who needs more time processing information, so give more time or something like that. Also mindful of students' accommodation needs. If they need someone else in the table, in the laboratory, like sign language interpreter, for example. I think that's it for now.
So 2 things to comment on, if I may. One is allowing students to self-identify their strengths and use them on behalf of a team really provides a student an opportunity to feel very proud, to say, I'm good at this, I want to do this. And then to use that not only to further their own learning, but to help their teammates. That's a wonderful, wonderful inclusive strategy. And really give students a chance to identify what they think they're really good at, and maybe even what they want to work at being better on. That's wonderful. The other thing I really like that you did is that you made the lab or the activity the applying. So they were doing the higher order thinking in the activity, and then you said that they'll understand and remember during the exam. I think a lot in a traditional course design, you often spend a lot of time on understand, remember, and then you test up, right? As sort of this trajectory up. Well, you did apply, play around with ideas in this higher order, and then you're going to test the basic understanding. And that's a wonderful model. That's a wonderful way to say the objectives are to understand, remember. It doesn't mean we can't start thinking, at the create apply stage. So I like that, I don't think I mentioned that and you flipped it around. Okay, we have one more team to go, team number 8. And thank you for holding out to the last.
Don't worry. So actually, so Evelise had to leave, and Kelvin, his microphone doesn't work, or his camera, so I'm gonna try to do this by myself and see where we go. With that, so for the questions, it was a question in Evelise class, in one of her neuroscience class, and so systems neuroscience, I believe. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, apart from the actual question, is the fact that we criticize a lot the question, because there was one thing was the questions, and you will see later the answers that were given by the professor were very off. So what he wanted and what he asked for. So the question was, describe where the alpha fiber terminates and the partner associated in proprioception. This is like the main question that they ask. And then it also says, draw on the board the connection, or draw on a paper, because it was homework in this case, the connection from 4 fibers from sensory to spinal cord. And so based on this, the Bloom taxonomy that you need is understanding and analyze. And so this is mostly because, so if you're doing a schematic, if you're putting something together that is this elaborate, you have to really be able to know all the parts and be to be able to recall and put this all together. You need a heavy, you need to have a good, you need to know a lot about the process. Therefore, you need to analyze before you step and do it. For the learning objectives, mostly we shows that learning about synaptic connections and nervous system development is what is what is the major target here. And so the way that we can make this a little more active, and this is where there was a disconnection, is because based on how it was asked, it didn't seem that it was a question that will have more than a few sentences, but really what we can do to be more active is that you can draw this connection on the board, and you can practice it before you do it, like in an actual test, for example. You can draw it in the board. You can do like a think pair share, so you can pair with someone else in the class, and you do your diagram first, and then you put it together. You talk with someone, your neighbors, see what you have in common, what you have different, and you can talk about it. And even then, students should suggest how to facilitate the brainstorming and coming up with the final anatomy. So that's what we put in for the active part. And finally, for more inclusive, and we said that keep in mind what the students know before joining the course, so that they can grasp all the concepts and not be lost in class, and put into context something like mutations and diseases that could arise from these connections to be disrupted. So more, to have more of an engagement, because she was telling us how they didn't necessarily know a lot about the anatomy of this, and it's really hard to answer a question like that if you don't know about it. And so the other thing is, always is important when you can engage the people, especially in the beginning of when you're starting a project or starting, a class about a certain topic, helps to put it in context and people be more excited and interested in. So that's what we put essentially.
Thank you. I'm really excited that you modeled something that is hard to have enough confidence to do, and that's to identify disconnects in teaching, especially if you know the teacher and these were your questions you either wrote or experienced. And it sounds like most of you use questions that you experienced as on the student side. And I think without saying a teacher made a wrong choice, you can say, I would choose to do it differently because I recognize a disconnect. And that is a wonderful way, again, to stand on the shoulders of giants. You don't have to recreate every lesson. That takes a long time. You can use lessons that you experienced, make them better. You can take a lesson that comes from a lecture and make it active. You can bring your own creativity, and by making better, I mean really making it better aligned. Take out that disconnect for students and let them do the activity that's most helpful for their learning. And I think you described that process really, really well. And I challenge everybody going forth to do the process you practiced today. You did it on a very micro scale. Continue to do it in your future. In your teaching, you can also apply this practice to giving a talk in your lab. If you want to go super far, you can apply it to Thanksgiving dinner. My end objective is that nobody cries, and so I don't put my aunt next to my grandma, right? They sit across the table from each other. So there, the process is an important part. And thank you for practicing the process. And I hope that you learned from each other, that you got new ideas from each other, and that you can use this as a starting point to think about your teaching and more. So the collaborative documents, by the way, we did those so that you can have them in the future. You can go back to these. You can use each other's ideas, much like scientists collaborate. Think about collaborating on your teaching as well. So in less than 5 minutes, I want to do a quick wrap up. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And a good teaching practice is to start and end with your objectives, because then there's some accountability for the teacher as well. You're asking your students to work and to build their own knowledge and construct their own knowledge. If I did my job today, so structurally building a structure, you're able to summarize key research-based arguments for active learning versus collaborative learning in STEM education. This is sort of a self-check. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot and ask you, can you do these things? But then if this were a class and I were to write a quiz, it's very easy for me to write a quiz to test these things. Could you categorize existing assessment questions using Bloom's taxonomy levels? You showed me you can do that. We made a really beautiful bell curve, which I like. And it was skewed farther towards higher order thinking skills than your average biology test across the nation or at Yale, showing that you were picking out questions that are hard. And they're hard because they're asking for more than memorization. And then the next one, can you explain key contrasts between backwards design, traditional course design? Can you identify appropriate active and collaborative learning strategies for students? This one, you gave me evidence just now. You gave each other evidence just now. This is what we did in this exercise, is you identified appropriate activities and collaborative learning strategies. And then you thought about multiculturalism and inclusion and what different approaches would mean for different students and how all students would be involved. I'm pretty confident we can check that box as a group right now. So thank you very much for that. hard work. The last thing I want to do, and these little things, I hope you consider them almost like these 10 GAM pieces, that they're pieces you can fit together to think about learning, but they're also single pieces you can take into your daily life as transferable skills. So the last thing I want to do is our very last collaborative document. And in a few minutes, just like we started out with, why do we teach science? If you still have that open, what transferable skills do you think you gained today? What do you think you can take into your daily lives? And here I want you to think back to Wilson's thoughts too. And this is a chance to reflect on what you learned for teaching, but what you learned that it's transferable as well. And everybody should be able to, can edit now, okay. And I realize a lot of people have left, so I won't belabor the point and wait for a ton of people. This is really just to carve out space for you to reflect on transferable skills of teaching.
I think I saw also on the chat that people thought, Adeline thought the backward design was a very good tool, and also the Bloom's taxonomy. And also Kelvin said being able to synthesize knowledge.
There's some great stuff here. I have so enjoyed learning with you, learning from you. This is an example for me of a collaborative learning environment, which is another vocabulary term from the realm of teaching, but really means that a group of people can synthesize knowledge better than a single person can, and create better, more creative solutions and ideas and understandings, foundationally informed by their different experiences. And so it has been an absolute pleasure to know you in this context, and what you have to say about your own experiences and how you're synthesizing new knowledge. I've learned from you, so I really want to thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to your organizers and ask that, can I keep and use our collaborative documents as well? If anyone has a problem with that, just send me an email and say no.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Corey. We really appreciated your contributions. So I think with that, we're finishing up. We have the 20th, we have a conversation with Lydia Villa-Kormarov, who's our keynote speaker for the year. And she's amazing. Monica and I have seen her in action. Don't forget to... Okay, everybody. See you next week.
Bye. Thank you.